One day, the world was gripped by a catastrophe of a terrifying magnitude, leading it to its end. Terrible monsters who wanted to devour humanity escaped from oblivion and began to destroy everything around them. And if some creatures could somehow be killed by a well-coordinated group, others inspired such horror that any attempts ended in failure, turning into a mountain of corpses. And some monsters were so powerful that they burned out souls with just one glance at their enemy. People fought as desperately as they could, but over time, hope left each of them. However, in contrast to the horror caused by the monsters, a stargate appeared from oblivion, returning hope to humanity. Those people who were not deprived of talent had a chance to enter these gates and acquire incredible abilities that made it possible to retake the world from powerful monsters. The world has held firm for many years, and one of the strongest strongholds of humanity has become the City of Dawn, whose territory witnessed tragic events that day. Robert Guardian was kicked into the backyard of his own home. Rising to one knee, Robert swore at his adopted brother, reproaching him for his betrayal. Darren stood in the doorway with the Guardian family's personal lawyer, grinning at Robert, who sat in the dust. A man dressed in a classic suit stepped forward, giving Robert a haughty look and explaining that, due to the fact that Robert had not awakened his abilities by the age of 18, by law, he loses his right to reside in the territory of the awakened community. Robert was shocked to hear that Darren, as a child adopted by the Guardian family, had the right to take over Robert's home for his full use. And although Robert tried to prove that he was right by mentioning those who, despite being of age, did not have abilities, he was again hit for his insolence. Robert fell backwards to the ground, barely able to hear himself being condemned for not believing in the city's laws. Having collected his papers, the lawyer prepared to leave, leaving the right to deal with Robert to Darren. Raising his head, Robert noticed the man's sly gaze directed at Darren, and barely heard him mention a certain promise from Darren. Smiling warmly at the lawyer, the guy said goodbye to him, guaranteeing the fulfillment of his promise. However, as soon as the man walked out of the gate, at the same instant, a kick struck Robert to the ground again. Having brazenly knocked the guy down, Darren put his foot on his head, pressing him to the ground and about to reveal the most important surprises to him. Smirking at his defeated brother, the fair-haired man admitted that he had been poisoning Robert since he was 10 years old, which is why he was unable to awaken. It turned out that Darren planned to deal with Robert in order to completely take possession of all of his property, which would provide him with prosperity and security for the rest of his life. Furious at his brother, Robert tried to get up and deal with the scoundrel. However, Darren hit the guy with another terrible news, which he planned to completely unsettle him. It turned out that Darren lied to the guy's parents about their last expedition, saying that it was in it that they would find a way to help Robert awaken. However, desperately wanting to complete it, the parents died. Realizing that it was his brother who was responsible for the death of his parents, Robert fell into despair, kneeling right in front of Darren, grinning maliciously. Deciding to finally put an end to this matter, the fair-haired one again sent the guy to the ground with a kick and ordered him to get out. Without looking up from sadness, Robert stood up and walked out the gate. When the guy took a few steps from the house, he turned around and looked at Darren with a withering look, threatening in a broken voice that he would return and would definitely take revenge for himself and his family. However, as soon as he turned away, his brother created a poisonous dart in his hands and quietly threw it at Robert's neck. Looking at the latter with contempt, Darren was sure that he would never see his loser brother again. After leaving home, Robert wandered around the city for several hours, without any plans, but with every step the strength left his body. The poison spread throughout the guy's body, poisoning the body and killing the mind, at one point causing the guy to stumble. Breathing heavily and trying to crawl on the ground, Robert swore in a hoarse whisper that he would definitely take revenge. But in the end, he closed his eyes and lost consciousness, sadly realizing that he would never wake up. At that moment, the clouds above the head of the guy lying on the ground thickened, and a light lit up in the very center of them. A second later, a column of flame shot through the skies at incredible speed, rushing towards the ground. And having reached the ground, the flame hit the head of the lying Robert. Surprisingly, the flame did not burn the body, but enveloped it like a blanket, shimmering on the skin and clothes until it went out. At the same moment, the guy opened his eyes, returning to life. When he rose to his knee, the first thing that came out of his mouth was the statement of the fact that the reincarnation technique had worked. It turns out that at the same time that Robert was learning about Darren's betrayal, Somewhere in heaven, the warrior god Adrian himself became a victim of betrayal. The thief goddess Milia struck him in the back with a mighty sword, forcing the mighty warrior to fall to his knee in confusion as to why his comrades were doing this to him. Amazed by his ignorance, his former comrades condemned God for wanting to oppose the demon god, considering the latter to be so powerful that it was impossible to imagine. In anger at the disbelief of his comrades, shouting that they had forgotten their own oath to protect humanity, Hadrian grabbed the blade sticking out of his chest with his hand. The power of his anger was so great that with one sharp movement, Adrian broke the blade into pieces amid his own cries about the greed and selfishness of the other gods. In shock, they all froze, looking at the unshakable will of the one who had just been accused of ignorance. Turning around, Adrian scorched his former friends with a burning gaze, full of rage and condemnation. If they had not been stunned, they might have been able to finish off the god warrior. But Adrian, taking advantage of their confusion, created a rune circle on the ground beneath him, embodying the legendary reincarnation technique. Adrian's soul, having left the body of the great god, turned out to be that same pillar of flame that pierced the heavens and struck the body of poor Robert. Standing on both legs, Adrian analyzed the situation and realized one very unpleasant fact about the new body. Taking advantage of the god warrior's experience, Adrian quickly realized that his new body was poisoned to the point that every organ was irreversibly damaged. Stunned that his mighty spirit had been transferred into such a weak body, Adrian began to study Robert's memories to understand what to do next. Images of all the tragic events that happened to Robert, and in particular, the fact of betrayal by his own brothers surfaced in his head. Adrian realized that his soul chose this particular body precisely because of the similarity of the tragic circumstances of death. Realizing that Robert's will before his death was incredibly strong, Adrian, feeling respect, vowed to fulfill this will at all costs. And as soon as he said this, Robert's soul appeared before his eyes in a golden flame, which, having learned that his last wish was in good hands, melted into thin air. And although Adrian made such a strong promise, he understood that due to the poison, Robert's body was too weak. But the great Adrian would not have been a great god warrior in his past life if he had been afraid to take risks when there were almost no chances. Having climbed into his own memories, Adrian began to look for what could help him cleanse his body and restore its former divine power. The answer was found almost instantly in the form of a secret technique that continues the path of the reincarnation technique. The 6 paths of reincarnation. Adrian understood that this technique would allow him to regain all the power he needed for his purposes. But he also knew that before that he needed to enter the Stargate in order to awaken. Gathering his strength, Adrian went straight to the Stargate, wanting to become stronger as soon as possible. It did not take him long to reach his goal and reach the gate, since the view to it opened from any street in the city. Approaching the territory where the gate stood, Adrian thought about where he was and exhaled calmly, deciding that his former comrades would never find him in a new body. Before visiting the gate, the former god had to register, and therefore he went straight to the counter, expressing his desire to undergo the awakening to the man standing behind it. The man, however, addressing Adrian by the name Roberta, made a dissatisfied face and scornfully indignant, saying that he had already tried to awaken twice this month. However, having heard everything that was said, Adrian looked at the man with an angry look and demanded to repeat it, only looking into his eyes. The man was clearly discouraged by such changes in Robert's character, and therefore was even speechless. The man was brought out of his stupor by the approaching captain of the guard named Harold, who wanted to know what happened between them. While the man was reporting to the captain, Adrian used Robert's memories and learned that in the past, Captain Harold was saved by the guy's parents. Apparently, the captain was a man of honor, because upon hearing the report of the man behind the counter, he immediately began to scold him, reminding him of how much the Guardian family had done for the city. Having heard no answer from his subordinate, who lowered his head in shame, Harold demanded a star map of awakening for Adrian. When he turned to the guy, Adrian saw not an angry grimace, but a warm smile, which caused quite pleasant emotions in the former god. But as soon as he took the card, Harold put his hand on the guy's shoulder and whispered that he should be more careful if he failed the awakening this time. And although the words were quite threatening, Adrian realized that they were spoken with concern for the son of the family that had once saved him. For this reason, Adrian saw off the departing captain with a grateful smile. Not one to hesitate, Adrian turned away from the reception desk and headed straight towards the Stargate. Approaching, He pulled out the map given by Harold and raised it above his head, after which it flew up and was immediately absorbed by the gate. Adrian, sighing before taking the important step, immediately followed. The guy's eyes were immediately covered with a golden haze, which melted away after a couple of seconds, revealing to him a view of a huge open square full of others trying to awaken. Adrian tried to take a step, but immediately trembled all over, because it was terribly difficult for the poisoned body to withstand even the pressure of the place of awakening. The guy realized that it would be incredibly difficult for him to achieve awakening under such conditions. He looked to the side and saw one of the test subjects fall under a bright pillar of light, the source of which was the star with which this person entered into resonance, and remembered that the more light of the star a person attracted, the greater the transformation his body would undergo. Turning his head in the other direction, Adrian saw with regret a man who had fallen to his knees in despair, because he could not resonate with any star, and because of this he would remain an ordinary person. Raising his head, Adrian used the God Warrior's senses and noticed a star that his body could resonate with, but it was too weak to do so. The situation was deplorable, because even if the guy received the light of a star and could be reborn, the transformation would not be complete. However, Adrian would not have been a God Warrior in his past life if he had not been willing to take risks, and so he began to embody the 6 paths of reincarnation technique, summoning as much spiritual flame as his past divine soul could. He used all the experiences from his past life to make the flame bright and strong enough to purify his new body. The fiery silhouette flared up more and more every moment, dousing Adrian with a heat that he did not notice. When the silhouette flared up so that the flame could blind, the fire swirled around the guy's body, transforming him. At first, the movement of the flame was calm and measured, but in an instant it accelerated to the state of a fiery tornado. When the tornado began to dissipate, a rune circle was lined up underneath it, corresponding to the technique that Adrian, standing in the very center, was going to use. As if noticing the light of the flame below, the largest star, like the sun, lit up even brighter right above Adrian. And a moment later, a pillar of her light pierced the heavens and rushed towards Adrian, who readily accepted it. His body seemed to melt in this light, transported to where his transformation was to continue. The light from the star with which Adrian's body resonated turned out to be so strong and bright that the other test subjects turned surprised glances at it, seriously believing that it was the light of the sun, not a star. At that moment, Adrian found himself in open space alone with the star that had chosen him. Its flame immediately engulfed the body of Adrian, who was ready for this and tensed, intending to curb it. The flame burned the guy's body painfully, ready to burn him if he lacked fortitude. However, in a violent outburst of emotion, Adrian endured the pain of the flames. His angry grin said more clearly than any words that he would endure any pain just to achieve his goals. In the end, the star's flame went out on Adrian's body, making it clear that the guy had harnessed its power, which made him feel truly powerful. However, it turned out that the power of the technique he used summoned the light of more than one star, and another, darker one appeared in front of Adrian. Her flame also engulfed the guy's body, but he readily accepted it and curbed it without much difficulty, after which he felt agile and fast. Having dealt with 2, he saw the 3rd and immediately set about obtaining her powers as well. The yellow flame gave way faster, and from it, Adrian felt that his will and determination became even stronger. Next was the flame of a blue star, the harnessing of which seemed to open up a different perspective for his mind. The flame of the green star seemed to remove the veil from his eyes, and Adrian felt that nothing, even the most microscopic, could be hidden from his gaze. And finally, the last star, whose flame was bright purple, was also subordinated to the will of Adrian, which is why his perception, according to his own feelings, became more specific. In the end, the technique of the 6 paths of reincarnation led to the flames of all 6 stars surrounding the guy's body in a bizarre and bright whirlwind. The speed of this vortex was so great that from the outside its shape looked like a sphere. In this realm, Adrian fell into a meditative state, synchronizing his own mind with the power of the stars and allowing it to have its full effect on his body. When Adrian felt that the job was done, the sphere burst into 1,000 pieces. Renewed, powerful, and absolutely healthy, Adrian climbed out, feeling his own omnipotence with every fiber of his body. The flame of one of the stars pliantly touched the guy's outstretched hand, which only confirmed his guess that the body was completely healed. At the same instant, a new, unusual rune circle lined up behind Adrian's back, the symbols of which, however, Adrian was familiar with. Adrian knew that after awakening, the body changes in accordance with the acquired class. But at this moment, he felt not only how the strength of a warrior permeates his body, causing a feeling of incredible strength in his muscles. He also noticed that his movements became smoother and his speed clearly increased, which was consistent with the class of a thief. In addition, he was aware of everything around him and himself much more clearly and distinctly, which is why he concluded that the magician's insight was now open to him. In addition, his vision became so piercing that he could notice even the smallest vibrations in the air near him, which made him realize that his vision began to correspond to the vision of an experienced archer. And although the will of the former god warrior was already unshakable, he clearly felt that it had only become sharper, which is why he was ready to immediately rush into battle, which usually characterizes the knight class. Having finally decided that this was all, Adrian was quite surprised that his perception had changed greatly, and therefore realized that even the qualities of the last summoner class were now available to him. Adrian was absolutely shocked by the fact that he had discovered all 6 classes, because even in his previous life, he had only heard of a couple of cases where someone managed to discover a predisposition for several classes, and even then, no more than 2. Clenching his fists proudly, the guy grinned, realizing that in this case, he would easily surpass even his previous self. Looking up, he saw that the space around him began to crumble, which meant that the awakening process would soon end. At the same moment, Adrian, closing his eyes and opening them again, walked out of the Stargate back to the place from which he entered. And on the way out, he met with the very thing that he clearly did not want to see at all. Because Darren stood there, instantly attacking Adrian with contemptuous comments towards his, as it seemed to the fair-haired, absolutely useless attempts to awaken. Having angrily looked at the scoundrel, Adrian, not wanting to stand on ceremony, boldly sent the guy. Darren was taken aback by this attitude from the one whom he had kicked with his own feet a few hours ago, and who now moved away from him as if the blonde man was not worth the dirt under his nails. Fury immediately boiled in the blood of Darren, who did not understand how Robert, who had been poisoned by him, could walk like this now, as if nothing had happened. Outraged by this outcome, the fair-haired man pulled out his daggers and shouted at his brother, intending to finish off the insolent man that very second. Captain Harold's cry was heard from the direction of the gate, warning Darren not to do anything rash. And Adrian, hearing this, turned towards the attacker just in time. Using his thief-class skills, Darren quickly found himself right in front of Adrian, ready to plunge his blades into him. However, he could not oppose anything to the former god warrior with his vast combat experience, who in the blink of an eye saw a bunch of holes in the enemy's attack. Dodging the inept attack, Adrian rushed forward, thrusting his fist straight towards his opponent. As soon as he got close enough to Darren, his fist instantly hit the latter right in the jaw. Adrian's blow was so strong that Darren was thrown several meters away. As Darren approached the wall, those around him watched in shock as the two awakened fought, amazed that Adrian was able to knock his brother down. Flipping in the air, Darren twisted and landed on his feet, not understanding how it was possible that his poisoned brother could send him flying with one blow. And although he was ready to immediately rush at Adrian again, his appearance as a warrior ready for battle put the guy into a stupor. At that very second, Captain Harold appeared between the fighters, shouting at Darren. Glancing at the blonde with an angry look, Harold heard him complain that the captain of the guard was too indulgent to the son of the Guardian family and regretted that he had not yet been fired. An indignant Harold, looking contemptuously at Darren, pointed out that anyone with 2 eyes could clearly see that Adrian had awakened, which meant Darren had no right to attack him. And although Darren wanted to say something in response, he was distracted by the surprised exclamations of onlookers, who were amazed at how beautifully the guy was besieged by the newly awakened one with just one blow. Outraged to the extreme, Darren looked at Adrian with an angry look, but could not do anything about it. And therefore, without saying a word, he turned around and left. Grinning as he left, Harold walked up to Adrian and used his portable analyzer to find out what class the guy received. Looking at the screen, Harold saw the symbol of a warrior and hastened to congratulate Adrian on this with all his heart. He noticed that it now became clearer how Adrian managed to send Darren flying with one blow. People who had previously seen Adrian as a loser who could not awaken suddenly began to smile in front of him, admiring how hard he had hit his stupid brother who decided to launch a frontal attack on the warrior. Adrian smiled at them, but in his head he was glad that he was able to hide the fact that he had unlocked more than one class, showing only the warrior class, because he was afraid that this feature might cause him difficulties. Harold put his hand on the guy's shoulder and, smiling warmly, again congratulated Adrian with all his heart. Taking the card out of the analyzer, Harold handed it to the guy, recommending that he quickly go to the Warrior Academy for training. Taking the card, Adrian examined it and sighed relaxedly, promising to try his best. However, to Harold's surprise, after removing the card, Adrian asked the captain when the monthly talent assessment would take place, in response to which the man replied that it would be today. And although Harold answered, he threw his shoulders up in surprise, asking the guy if he was going to go to the assessment, having just woken up. Having received an affirmative answer, Harold again put his hand on the guy's shoulder and looked seriously into his eyes, speaking with the desire to keep him from rash actions. He said that immediately after awakening, people receive the status of a student and must go to the academy to participate in a talent assessment after 1 or 3 years. Usually, only after training, an awakened person can get the only chance in their entire life to receive a talent that accompanies the class. Harold cautioned that such a chance is truly the only one, and if you make a mistake during the test, the talent may turn out to be bad and ruin the person's entire subsequent life. Adrian, to the captain's surprise, only smiled relaxedly, convincing the man that everything would be fine, and he was absolutely confident in his plan. Turning to the side, Adrian said goodbye to the captain and headed straight to the trucks that would take him to the test site. And although he thought that Darren had left, he, looking from the shadows, looked at the guy with a frown, thinking that his decision to go to the assessment immediately after waking up seemed incredibly arrogant to him. Turning his head, Adrian noticed the scoundrel, and therefore thought that he should keep an eye on him, because Darren probably would not give up trying to kill his brother. Outside the city, there are a really large number of monsters, and although individually they are afraid of the light of the Stargate, gathering in huge hordes, the monsters cast aside their fear, rushing to attack a peaceful human settlement. And although the awakened ones oppose the monsters in large detachments, not a single foray is complete without losses. The soul of everyone who fought for humanity against monsters gains immortality under the light of the stars, and their tombstones emit huge amounts of stellar energy, distorting space and forming a special dimension known as the Land of Gifts of Starlight. It is there that each newly awakened one takes part in the talent assessment to continue the glory of the ancestors and to receive the accompanying talent from the predecessors. While on his way to the territory where the talent assessment was being organized, Adrian used the magician's insight to easily read a fairly thick book telling about the upcoming test for Adrian. He read that around the city there are mainly undead, which means it is these monsters that need to be targeted when preparing. Adrian recalled that in his past life, without any support from his elders, he was able to obtain the accompanying talent of the gold rank only through his own work. He read that 1 in 10,000 people receives the gold rank, and the majority in turn receives the lowest rank of white. An interesting piece of information for Adrian was the fact that only 1 in a million can achieve an epic rank talent, which is what he was aiming for. Adrian had to look away from the book when the trucks finally reached their destination, and the guy was able to go straight to the hero's cemetery. Opening the book again, Adrian walked to his seat, trying not to be distracted by the whispers of the young men around him, surprised at his presence. Throwing a not cheerful glance at the pile of graves, Adrian was surprised that the guys who studied at the academy were so ignorant of the test. The guy's attention was suddenly attracted by a girl armed with a bow, about whom everyone around him instantly began to whisper. Hearing that her name was Rebecca and that she awakened at only 11 years old, Adrian looked at her appraisingly and was not at all surprised to see that her aura was no stronger than usual, although the concentration of her soul was quite dense. At this time, a group of 6 tomb guardians of the lands of gifts of starlight lined up in front of the crowd of awakened disciples. Especially notable among them were the stocky warrior and the long-haired archer. The warrior called his comrade and whispered congratulations to him that his guild of archers would soon be replenished in the form of such a gifted warrior as Rebecca. And although the archer waved away these congratulations, his appearance literally screamed about how happy he was. Seeing this, The warrior didn't miss the chance to joke about how disappointing it would be if she suddenly got no higher than iron rank. The comrades immediately began to argue, but the other guardians tried to calm them down and suggested finally starting the test. The guardian knight came forward with a speech in which he called on everyone present to pay tribute to their ancestors before the test. All those who came for the test did not hesitate to kneel in front of the tombstones. When they stood up again, the knight continued his speech, saying that these lands were truly dangerous and they had to be careful not to die. In turn, each of the guardians expressed parting words to the subjects. The largest tombstone suddenly lit up, and the streams of energy escaping from it formed a portal to the earth, where the test was to take place. Having parted, the guardians opened the passage to the portal for the students, where they all, including Adrian, moved. Adrian had a clear plan, and therefore he consulted the book in order to implement it as successfully as possible. Although those around him clearly saw in his reading more stupidity than ingenuity. At one point, a fat guy blocked Adrian's path and directly called him an idiot, with a malicious grin recommending that he return to where the guy came from. Adrian did not respond to the attacks, only throwing a contemptuous look at the scoundrel, which caused even more aggression on the part of the fat man. Finally, taking a step to the side, Adrian walked around the guy, advising him to take better care of himself. At the same instant, the silhouette of the ancestor's spirit shone above the fat man's head, forcing him to turn around. It turned out that the guy accidentally stepped right into the territory of one of the evaluator spirits, beginning his test of the spirit. A whole horde of spiders with malicious, ghostly faces suddenly appeared in front of the guy, the very sight of which made the fat man scream in fear. The guy began to wave his arms chaotically, trying to protect himself from the terrible monsters. However, a moment later he was already lying on the floor, defeated. A white ring sparkled above his head, symbolizing that the arrogant guy had received a lower-ranking talent. Adrian slowly moved along the lands of testing, passing by each of the spirits of his ancestors, knowing that the most difficult and therefore valuable tests were in the very depths. The guy was not distracted by the students screaming with joy, whose fortitude allowed them to receive bronze and iron talents. Around him, there were sounds of battles and tests of fortitude, where someone achieved success, and someone tragically lost, thereby ruining their entire lives. Adrian, in turn, did not pay any attention to the events around him, consulting the book and building his route to the most distant lands. On the way, he was called out by the same girl who caused a big commotion when she arrived for the test. She tried to warn Adrian that further down the road the tests would be much worse, and therefore more dangerous, for which Adrian thanked her and himself warned that external forces would not help her pass the assessment. Not understanding what the guy was talking about, Rebecca looked back at the mechanical guards walking next to her, surprised that some student could so easily recognize that they were not real. And when she turned back to the guy, he had already left. Looking at the book again, Adrian began to think out loud, wondering why he had not yet met the silver-ranked warrior who should have been here, judging by the map. At the same instant, a beam of spiritual flame rushed towards Adrian, forcing the latter to dodge. In front of the guy stood the spirit of a warrior, looking puzzled, because he probably did not expect to see here just a student who, judging by his first impression, had not even been to the academy. Noticing that the spirit was confused, Adrian released his own spiritual energy, which took the form of a mighty warrior several times higher than the spirit of the appraiser, which greatly surprised the latter. Seeing this, the spirit instantly disappeared, not wanting to get involved with such power, which is why Adrian concluded that the energy of his soul would attract a lot of attention from the spirits of fallen heroes. And although, in addition to the faint glow of the stars, there was a smoking darkness swirling around, Adrian knew his surroundings perfectly, thanks to the book, which indicated in the form of coordinates how to get to the desired ancestor spirit. After checking it, the guy turned his head and, using the grave of the disappeared spirit as a guide, moved to the right in search of more powerful spirits. As soon as he was again in the vicinity of the star tombstones, the two spirits instantly incarnated, and their spiritual light rushed towards Adrian. The guy dodged and turned to face two puzzled spirits, who, seeing how bright the energy of his spirit was, turned to each other. To Adrian's surprise, the spirits began to fight with each other, from which the guy concluded that his soul was so attractive to them that they were ready to fight each other for it. Smiling awkwardly, the guy ran away, finally apologizing for not being able to choose them for his test. Adrian moved deeper and deeper, meeting more and more spirits who wanted to test the guy and give him their talent. Passing by the mighty warrior, Adrian met the spirit of a dexterous and nimble girl who tried to stay in his field of vision as long as possible. But he rejected her too. Seeing the golden spirit of the curvy sorceress, Adrian even became embarrassed and for a long second could not take his eyes off her attractive forms. But turning away, he moved towards the designated goal. For long hours, the guy traveled through the lands of talent assessment in search of epic rank spirits, but he did not come across them. Although the fact was that even the golden spirits turned their attention to him. Passing by one of the trees, Adrian heard the sound of battle, and deciding to briefly take a break from the monotonous search, went towards the sound to see what was making it. Coming out into an open clearing in the middle of the forest, the guy saw the golden light of the test in which Rebecca, whom he knew, fought, trying to find her talent. And although Adrian warned her, the picture that opened to him made it clear to him that the girl did not listen to the warnings, because even she did not understand why the spirit of her ancestor was attacking her so fiercely. In anger, the golden archer attacked the girl with a hail of arrows, not wanting to give her his talent. Landing into the ground, the golden arrows were engulfed in turquoise flames from tip to fletching until they finally changed. The arrows turned into monsters, which immediately rushed at the girl, covered by doll guards. The girl decided that the ancestor was seriously going to kill her descendant, although she really could not understand how she had angered the golden spirit. Expecting that she would have to fight only with spirit, Rebecca was taken aback when she saw monsters that were strong enough that a simple student could not cope with. Not wanting to give up, the girl, with well-aimed shots, destroyed every monster that rushed forward to bite her to death. Even if she couldn't defend herself from blows from behind, the puppet guards boldly covered her, throwing themselves under the jaws of the creatures so that the mistress would remain unharmed. Looking up from the corpse of one of the monsters, the girl saw the furious grin of her ancestor, already pointing a new arrow in her direction and shouting that Rebecca was not worthy. Another arrow flew out at incredible speed towards the girl, ready to pierce her body. But Rebecca was not going to, and therefore jumped away from the trajectory of the shot. In turn, the arrow right in flight turned into another monster, whose jaws were ready to immediately gnaw its throat. With a well-aimed shot that was so fast that it was difficult for the eye to notice, the girl dealt with the creature and, exhaling heavily, began talking about how her grandfather had always called her the most talented in their family. Looking up in despair, she saw that one of her mechanical guards had been almost completely destroyed. Tears began to well up in her eyes from misunderstanding why her ancestor considered her unworthy and wanted to finish off his descendant. The spirit, however, did not pay attention to the girl's tears and aimed a new arrow at her, shouting in a voice full of rage that she was unworthy of his power. Proudly straightening up right in front of her ancestor, the girl boldly looked into the spirit's eyes burning with anger and cried out with the question of what she had done to deserve his rage. Peering out from behind the tree, Adrian calmly asked the girl if she really didn't understand what exactly she had done wrong. Distracted from his original goal, the golden spirit looked at Adrian and was immediately dumbfounded by how strong the aura was in this guy. Seeing her ancestor's surprise, the girl instantly felt angry and again threw a defiant glance at him, crying out about how hard she had honed her skills and strengthened her soul. Using all her will, Rebecca firmly looked at the spirit, constantly reassuring herself that she would never be left without the talent inherent in each member of her family. Pulling back the string of her bow, the girl cried out that she would release her arrow even if she had to die. At the same instant, her body was engulfed in harmless golden flames inherent to the spirit with which she fought, which is why Rebecca realized that she was able to resonate with her ancestor. Adrian smiled and noted that the talent assessment test is primarily about will, courage, and fortitude, and not physical strength. The guy said that it was the mechanical guards who protected the girl during the battle that became an indicator of her fear of battle, which is why the ancestor shouted about her unworthiness. The golden light of the test finally faded, and Rebecca realized that the test was over in complete victory. Sighing heavily, she noticed how tense every muscle was after the hilarious fight. The golden archer extended his hand forward and the flame from it touched the girl's body, healing her and gifting her with what she had come for. Proud and pleased with herself, Rebecca passed the test, and therefore received the sign of golden talent that accompanies her family. Looking from the side, Adrian smiled, seeing how the girl received something that would make her life incredibly prestigious. As the spirit vanished into thin air, Rebecca turned to him and awkwardly thanked him for the advice the guy had given her. And although the girl asked how he himself, being just a student awakened quite recently, ended up so far in the lands where the golden talents are located, Adrian only answered that his goal was the best possible talent, and, turning away, moved away. Noting that his soul seemed weak, the girl heard the guy boldly say that it was none of her business and asked to keep his presence here a secret. Seeing that the guy walked away from the lands of the gold ranks further into the depths, the girl was quite taken aback, realizing that his goal was even higher. In the end, Adrian reached his goal, in the form of a huge tombstone connected by a monstrous golden chain. Smiling contentedly, the guy noticed that he was on the right track, since he saw something so colossal in front of him. The moment Adrian took another step, his body tensed from the terrifying force of pressure, indicating how difficult the test awaited the guy, since it was difficult for him to even be here. The huge, monstrous dog looked to be of advanced rank, and therefore, according to Adrian, he was an incredible number of times stronger than the guy himself. However, the guy was not at all afraid, but on the contrary, he was delighted, realizing that it was here that the concentration of spiritual energy was so great that he could absorb as much of it as he wanted, gaining strength. Crouching in the lotus position, the guy began to free his spirit to interact with the infinite and powerful energy surrounding him. Clasping his hands, he concentrated all his strength in them, which is why the energy that permeated the air began to be embodied and formed into a sphere in smooth threads. At the same time, behind Adrian's back, a runic circle of bright blue color appeared right out of nowhere, which helped the guy absorb the flows surrounding him. In the end, he stood up and straightened up, and the flows of energy dissipated, because Adrian had already absorbed the maximum amount for the status of a student. As a result of these manipulations, the guy could feel that his strength increased 6 times, which means he could safely withstand the pressure of the place surrounding him. Raising his gaze, he boldly looked at the monstrous dog protecting the tombstone. As soon as he stepped closer, Adrian came into the field of view of the Hellhound, which is why it, which had previously been lying peacefully, rose to all fours and growled menacingly. A huge beast, whose jaws could tear apart an entire crowd with one bite, stood in front of Adrian, ready to destroy anyone who dared to appear for a test of epic rank. However, Adrian, who was a former god warrior, was not at all afraid of the terrifying sight and boldly stepped forward. In an instant, the monster pushed off with all 4 paws and rushed at the guy, intending to tear him apart. But Adrian himself was not going to die so easily. The rune circle that appeared behind him served as a much-needed acceleration for Adrian, and he, using such a useful skill, rushed into battle. His speed was so incredible that the hellish dog, grinning angrily at the enemy, was completely unable to keep up with the warrior flashing like lightning. Dodging another blow, Adrian grinned maliciously, calling the hound just a puppy, unable to provide worthy resistance. At that same second, the dog let out a monstrous roar so loud that Adrian had to group himself to protect himself from it. In a mindless rage, the dog again rushed straight at the guy, ready to finish him off for his insolence. And although his jaws were almost closed on Adrian's body, he only grinned maliciously and did not move from his place. And as soon as they closed, Adrian penetrated through the upper jaw of the dog's mouth, as if passing through a dense wall of fog that did not cause any harm. Adrian stood over the hound's jaw, contentedly noting that a real hound was undead and would not react in any way to provocation, unlike this dog, who flew into a rage. With one flick of his finger, the confident Adrian destroyed the dog's form, breaking it into hundreds of pieces. Having landed, the guy proudly straightened his clothes and looked at the stairs, which the mighty beast so zealously defended. Adrian had a view of the incredibly majestic-looking gate through which he had to pass. As soon as he came closer, the gate swung open with a loud buzz in front of the brave warrior who had come to show what he was capable of. And although confidence flashed in his eyes, Adrian was a little worried about what was happening now, and what was about to happen any minute. Looking straight ahead, the guy took a deep breath and proudly stepped forward, like a worthy warrior who had earned the right to gain strength. Although these gates were called hellish, behind them Adrian saw a rather calming landscape in the form of a waterfall and lake, surrounded by rocks and ancient trees. But the guy didn't have time to admire the beauty, because at the same moment he stepped closer, a pillar of burning flame headed towards him with incredible speed, forcing him to dodge. Turning in the direction from which the flames came out, Adrian only managed to notice how a blade burning with fire was approaching his face. Only having time to notice the blade, Adrian did not even cover his eyes when it stopped a centimeter from the face of the one who dared to come for the epic talent. A heroic spirit of epic rank hovered in the air in front of the guy, raising his blade and looking at the newcomer in surprise, who turned out to be just a student. Bravely looking straight into the warrior's eyes, Adrian asked him not to hold back, arguing that he had gotten here not through luck, but out of a desire to see what epic rank could do. The stunned spirit warrior looked at the disciple with an amazed look, not understanding how a simple disciple could dare to go so far just to see what an epic rank could do. Smiling slyly, Adrian chose his words and asked the warrior to finally conduct a test, because he was going to show the spirit all the power he possessed. Having softened, the warrior sighed and corrected the guy, noting that the fact that he had reached this place does not mean that he could defeat a representative of epic rank. But he smiled and agreed to show his power. At the same instant, with one click of the warrior's fingers, the guy found himself in the arena, looking around in surprise. After analyzing the situation, he realized that his spiritual energy had quadrupled, surpassing the limitations imposed on being a disciple. It turned out that the warrior transferred not his body, but Adrian's mind and his own straight into the arena, and their bodies remained where they stood. At this time, the bodies of Adrian and the warrior's spirit were observed by 5 more spirits, whose energy shone with a bright light of epic rank. They were clearly pleased when they saw how, for the first time in a long time, someone came to their lands for a talent of epic rank. Although they were surprised that the person who came turned out to be a completely undistinguished student. One of the spirits was clearly angry that the warrior spirit was the first to get to Adrian, because after defeating the Hellhound, he himself was going to test the student. At this time, Adrian, already armed with a sword, was warming up, wondering out loud that the epic rank turned out to be so strong that, just by desire, he transported the guy straight to the world of dreams. The warrior standing in front of Adrian swung his blade and threw it to the side so that it got stuck in the stone. Straightening his arms, he invited Adrian to attack, ready to fight on equal terms, because the spirit itself compared its strength with the strength of the guy. Smirking, Adrian noted that his opponent was acting somewhat arrogantly, thinking that he could defeat a guy without a sword on equal terms. A moment later, the guy rushed into battle, using all his fighting skills and past life experience to leave his opponent no chance. And although the spirit fought desperately, he understood that even with a sword in his hands, it would be incredibly difficult for him to defend himself, let alone unarmed resistance. The man tried his best, but Adrian was incredibly fast and attacked as actively as he could. In the end, the spirit warrior was unable to dodge the final attack, and the guy put the blade to his neck. The warrior was sincerely amazed at how strong this disciple turned out to be, so boldly performing in front of a spirit of epic rank, despite the fact that he had become awakened only recently. Smiling kindly at the amazed spirit, the guy invited him to give it his all and show him what the epic rank is really capable of. Concentrating on the upcoming fair fight, the man extended his hand and pulled his blade into it, which burst out of the stone. Smiling at the upcoming battle, both warriors rushed at each other, wanting to cross swords and find out which of the two was stronger. The swords of both warriors clashed, striking sparks in a stunning dance of battle. And although the spirit warrior fought desperately, one mistake was enough for the former god warrior to make one precise attack with his blade, and this one blow was enough to knock out the blade and hands of the stunned enemy. The warrior spirit was absolutely at a loss, because he sincerely could not understand how only a student could defeat him. In his eyes, you could see the incomprehension with which he looked at his hands, as if doubting his own abilities. Satisfied with himself, Adrian thought that now the result of his test was quite satisfactory in order to finally receive the epic rank talent he deserved. And although he was ready to receive his reward, the spirit warrior suddenly disappeared into the air, causing confusion in Adrian. Returning to his body, the warrior curiously examined his opponent, whose mind was still in the world of dreams. Other epic spirits, seeing how their comrade returned to his body, were surprised, deciding that the test was over so quickly. And besides, there was no ritual for transferring talent, and they concluded that the guy had lost. However, they were puzzled when they saw that Adrian himself had not yet returned from the dream world, and therefore they asked their comrade what happened to them there. Raising his head proudly and not looking away, the warrior honestly admitted that he had lost the battle. The rest of the spirits were shocked when they heard that their comrade, whose strength reached an epic level, lost to an ordinary student, even though they were equal in the dream world. They assumed that the warrior had simply given in. But he shook his head and replied that the fight was fair and he was rightfully defeated, and for this reason, he had an idea. After listening to their comrade, the epic spirits were divided, trying to decide whether to follow his plan or not. However, after consulting, they decided to agree, and at the same moment, all 6 were transported to the world of dreams and appeared before Adrian's eyes. Adrian, who had already thought that his rival had abandoned him in this world, relaxed when he discovered that he had returned with reinforcements in the form of 5 spirits of epic heroes. As soon as they appeared in this world, each of the 6 spirits first looked at the one they were about to test with an appraising glance. Smiling kindly, the spirit mage noticed that the guy did not blink an eye when he saw as many as 6 epic spirits in front of him. Scratching his beard, the elder opened his eyes and spoke with the hoarseness in his voice characteristic of his appearance. Removing one hand behind his back and nodding proudly towards his comrades, the magician invited Adrian to fight all 6 epic spirits at the same time. Looking at those who came with confusion, Adrian heard that if he wins, he will receive 1 epic talent from each of them, which is why his eyes sparkled with awareness of the situation. Behind the spirits of men stood the archer and the summoner, who, having sarcastically examined the guy, suggested that he leave with the talent of a warrior, because judging by his appearance, he would not have enough strength. In response, the former god warrior laughed like a madman, receiving sincere pleasure from the whole situation. Proudly looking up and raising his sword, the guy expressed his desire to accept the challenge and his unwavering readiness to fight. The magician frowned, calling the guy self-confident, and the knight called him arrogant, although he seemed to only like it more. Taking a stance, Adrian did not take his eyes off his opponents, ready for any attack from them. The spirits had already pulled out their weapons and also prepared for battle, warning the guy that the following events could be damn dangerous for him. At the same moment, as the magician finished speaking, the thief spirit disappeared from sight, rushing into an attack with amazing speed. In a second, the thief was right behind Adrian, ready to inflict a mortal wound on him with a blade in the back. However, he did not expect that, using the archer's reflexes, he instantly turned around and swung his sword towards his opponent. One strong blow to the defending enemy was enough to send the thief spirit flying. And although he defended himself, the force of the blow was so great that, having crashed into the wall, the spirit immediately lost consciousness, leaving the battle. Realizing that they could not win alone, the epic heroes rushed into battle all together in order to remove the smug smile from the opponent's face. The mage's fireballs were clearly of extraordinary power, but using the thief's speed and the archer's reaction, the guy easily dodged each of them. Thanks to the magician's insight, he could calculate every swing of the blade in order to protect himself from the archer's shots. The spirit mage tried to use a paralyzing discharge to stop the guy and allow his fellow knight to strike, but Adrian, for some reason, ignored the effect of the spell, rushing straight to the old man. Finding himself close to the spirit mage, the guy swung his hand to strike, noting with pleasure that the knight's physique and willpower perfectly protected against magic. Again, with one blow, Adrian was able to knock out the mage, ensuring that now magic would not prevent him from fighting. Turning around, the guy used all his reactions to deflect the arrows of the archer spirit flying at him and send them all back to the attacker. And although the girl dodged the arrows, Adrian, who immediately approached her, swung his blade, thereby knocking out the archer, leaving only 3 opponents in front of him. Cursing, the spirit knight complained to the spirit summoner that he could not keep track of her, and she, in turn, asked him to delay the enemies so that she could call on a huge bear to help. A simple ritual was enough for her to make a huge, monstrous bear rise to its full, mighty height in the arena. The spirit knight did not disappoint and, raising his morning star, used his ability to immobilize Adrian. At the same instant, the bear rushed to attack the guy, wanting to tear him apart with its claws. And although the bear was a beast created by the spirit of the summoner, Adrian's summoning abilities were stronger, and he seized control of the bear, forcing it to attack the knight, knocking him out of the fight with one blow. Adrian, who instantly found himself next to the girl, smiled slyly at the girl before striking. Like the others, Adrian dealt with the girl with one blow, knocking her out. Turning to the last epic rank spirit, Adrian asked if he would fight, but the warrior smiled, answering that he had already lost before, and therefore there was no point in fighting. Turning around, Adrian saw that all the epic rank spirits had already stood up and cheered for his victory. Having congratulated him, they returned to the real world and stood over the guy's body in a circle, intending to perform a ritual after which Adrian would receive his talent. As promised, the spirits gave him not one talent, but one talent from each. Although no one knew whether they could exist in one body, the energy released by each of the spirits flowed into Adrian's body and began to mix with the 5 others. The aura emanating from the mixing of talents turned out to be so bright that even the mighty epic spirits were amazed at the power of its light. The amazed spirit mage whispered tremulously that the resulting rank would be much higher than epic. Concentrating the energy of the spirits within himself, Adrian strained greatly, trying to keep it inside himself, and realizing that the last stage of merging was much more difficult. Unleashing the full power of his fighting spirit, Adrian used it to cope with such a difficult task. The guy's spirit was eventually able to contain all this powerful energy that permeated the body, and it transformed into a crystal heart in the guy's hands. In receiving this new power, Adrian sensibly assessed it, thinking about the scale of talent levels so well known to everyone. Knowing that getting a gold rank was incredibly difficult and an epic rank was almost impossible, no one would have thought that there could be a talent level higher than epic. The heart transformed back into streams of energy of incredible power, which were instantly absorbed into the body of Adrian, who instantly realized that his new talent turned out to be mythical. In the guy's mind, an understanding of the new talent arose, and, in particular, why the energy of the spirits took on the shape of a heart, because this new talent was called the Heart of the Brave and could increase the hero's power 10 times. Opening his eyes, Adrian saw that the epic spirits were enveloped in a warm light, and their faces expressed satisfaction and pride, because they not only saw a talent whose power is higher than the epic, but they themselves endowed them with a worthy warrior. Smiling at the heroes disappearing in this light, Adrian relaxed peacefully, proud that he was able not only to fulfill his goal, but to achieve something even better. Turning to the exit from the lands of epic rank, the guy stopped for the last time to leave an offering to the disappeared spirits, in the form of the book that helped him get here, as well as a bottle of delicious sake stored in advance, promising them that he would definitely protect the City of Dawn from any misfortunes. At this time, a proud Rebecca returned from the lands of testing, illuminated by the symbol and light of the gold rank, which greatly pleased the guardian archer, who instantly called her a true genius. Turning her head away, the girl embarrassedly babbled that she received her talent only thanks to the help of her dear mentor, and she was not a genius at all. The archer guardian, proud of the girl, did not agree with her, saying that the gold rank appears once every 10 years, and at the same time looking sarcastically at the warrior guardian, none of whose students received a rank higher than silver. Outraged by this gesture, the guardian warrior protested that the guardian archer's students could only rely on luck, without deserving the high talents they received. And although the guardian warrior claimed that among the warriors there would be such a strong awakened one that he could receive a gold rank, he only met a malicious grin from his comrade. Distracted from the squabble between the two guardians, Rebecca looked around, trying to spot Adrian and finally find out what rank the one who so calmly walked past the lands of the gold rank received. Realizing that there was no guy in the area, the girl looked at the portal, anxiously waiting for him to come out of it. When the guardian archer decided to announce the end of the test, Rebecca asked him to stop and wait, because one test subject never left the test grounds. At the same moment, Adrian, stretching his neck, climbed out of the portal, meeting there not with a storm of applause, but only with such familiar disdain, because the guardian archer was sure that the guy had failed his test. Rebecca, blushing at the sight of the guy, did not hear her mentor's sarcastic comments, remembering only, not without a shadow of embarrassment, that the name of her new acquaintance was Adrian. Glancing to the side, the guy immediately saw the fat man who had crossed his path at the very beginning of the test, and who was right now mocking Adrian, thinking that he was hiding from the test, afraid of failing it. Not paying attention to the sarcastic comments, the guardian warrior took a step towards the guy, asking with a smile what rank one of his ward warriors received. Smiling, Adrian relaxed for a second, which is why the aura of his talent shone faintly, covering the entire body of the awakened one. And although the hero received a mythical rank, everyone around saw what he wanted to show them, namely the aura and symbol of the gold rank shining on the guy's body. Everyone around seemed to have broken loose, heatedly discussing and amazed at the fact that this time, 2 participants received the gold rank. Although even one was an incredible rarity. Smiling contentedly, Adrian noted, not without pleasure, that he was incredibly lucky that his new talent allowed him to flaunt the rank that the hero himself wanted. Quietly resting his hands on his hips, the guy, not deigning even a glance to the arrogant scoundrels mocking him, told them out loud that they should not mock others, but try to become stronger themselves, which greatly embarrassed the dumbfounded fat man. And only Rebecca, whose confused look Adrian caught, could not understand why the guy received only a gold rank, because he went much further than the place where the golden spirits were. As if he had read the girl's thoughts, Adrian put his index finger to his lips, reminding her that he had asked her to remain silent about where he was going in the testing lands. Once again embarrassed by the attention of her new acquaintance, Rebecca only thought about how many secrets Adrian had from everyone around him. And while she was reasoning, the guardian warrior rushed to Adrian, whose smile made it clear that he was incredibly happy that one of his charges was finally able to receive a gold rank. Although Adrian, not receiving pleasure from someone else's touch, asked him to leave him alone, calling him a bearded man. Offended by the unexpected name-calling, the guardian took one step away from Adrian, removing his hand from his shoulder. However, after a moment he put aside his offense, deciding that a student receiving a gold rank was much more important than any grievances, and therefore he again put his hand on his shoulder and smiled joyfully, saying how very proud he was of his student. However, other warrior teachers, looking at the man with disapproval, noted displeasedly that they were seeing Adrian for the first time, and therefore did not consider his victory in the test to be their merit. However, even the guardian archer, who just a second ago was mocking his comrade, now stood with a serious look, noting that receiving as many as 2 golden talents was a real historical event. The news that 2 entire members had achieved gold ranks spread with incredible speed through the streets of the City of Dawn, so quickly that almost on the same day, Darren, who wanted to finish Adrian off more and more every second, learned about this truly frightening event for him. He instantly flew into a rage as soon as he found out that Adrian had received a gold rank, because the guy did everything to prevent this from happening. Adrian himself, after the test, did not want to waste time, and realizing that he could not do without the academy, after the test he immediately went there. His mere appearance at the academy became news #1 for all the people there, because gold rank among warriors is an incredible rarity. Standing near the counter with the guardian warrior, whose name, as it turned out, was Frank, Adrian heard with slight dissatisfaction all these comments addressed to him, which, from malicious and arrogant, became interested and flirting. Frowning, Adrian even began to regret that he showed people his gold rank, because he received much more unnecessary attention than he wanted. Finally, the man behind the counter, smiling welcomingly, handed Adrian an envelope, a badge with a warrior symbol, and a card indicating his status. Still proud of his ward, Frank put his hands on his hips and wholeheartedly congratulated Adrian on officially joining the Warriors Guild. Adrian was about to unpack the envelope, but Frank, who stepped aside, waved his hand and called him to follow, because he was going to help the guy get a well-deserved reward for his work. For the first time since the test, Adrian smiled at Frank and followed, noting to himself that he was surprised by the fact that the guild treated its members well enough. Walking through the long corridors of the academy, the men arrived at a training room filled with mannequins and exercise equipment, in the middle of which stood a stocky man whose hair, with its bright green color, resembled a fresh apple. Having greeted Adrian and Frank, the man introduced himself as Roosevelt Walter and added that he was the treasurer of the Warriors Guild, and therefore, it was he who would offer Adrian a reward corresponding to the gold rank. Looking into the box that Roosevelt bowed his head and handed to the guy, Adrian saw a book there, the inscription on the cover of which read about the name of a special skill of the warrior class. Taking the box from Adrian's hands, Frank himself looked inside and smiled, looking up at Roosevelt and noting that the treasurer is very generous, because this skill is really powerful. To which Roosevelt, not without pleasure, said that they are obliged to invest all their efforts in the development of a gold rank hero. In addition to the skill, Adrian also received as many as 10 star stones of the initial rank, which is a significant reward, since Frank himself received only 1 at one time. Opening the book, Adrian read a couple of lines, but almost immediately became perplexed by their content. Roosevelt smiled again when he saw the guy's reaction and said that learning skills is an incredibly important activity for every awakened person, and therefore Adrian is recommended to start learning as soon as possible. Smiling joyfully, the guy agreed with the treasurer, promising to start training as soon as possible, and thought to himself that things were turning out very, very interesting. As soon as Adrian and Frank left, Roosevelt removed the smile from his face and headed to his office, where Darren was already waiting for him, who immediately began asking the treasurer whether he had completed his task. Calmly closing the door behind him, Roosevelt looked at Darren, slightly dissatisfied, and just as calmly noted that he could cope with any task much better than Darren. It turned out that Roosevelt specially altered Adrian's skill book, and because of it, the guy could soon become insane. Enjoying the thought of how sinisterly ingenious his plan was, Roosevelt finished the thought by telling Darren that he would have to send a request for a duel as soon as Adrian went crazy, thanks to which the guy would be able to get rid of his rival without unnecessary problems. Exhaling in a relaxed manner, Darren smiled at Roosevelt, noting with pleasure that he always completes tasks 100%, and therefore, as gratitude for his work, he will definitely thank his comrade when Adrian dies. Looking away, Roosevelt said that he was only following orders from above, and therefore did not count on a reward, but of course he would be happy with it. He chose to turn away when Darren, with a distraught look and a cruel smile on his face, promised that he would kill his sworn brother no matter the cost. And although the plan was really good and would have worked on someone else, Adrian's real mythic rank told him perfectly well that the skill was actually altered, which bodes well for him. Adrian thought deeply, comparing all the facts with each other, and seriously suspecting that this trouble with the skill was directly related to Darren. Having instantly seen through Roosevelt's plan, Adrian put the book aside and decided that he would gladly play along with him, pretending that he had really fallen under the influence of such a weak illness that the book was supposed to create on him. Adrian sarcastically imagined what Roosevelt would look like when he saw that his plan did not work, especially if Frank was nearby. And the 10 star stones that he received for his gold rank would help the guy in this matter. Having opened the box, Adrian remembered that star stones are actually the energy of real star stones concentrated into crystal form, using which the awakened can very quickly increase power and become stronger. Realizing that thanks to his experience as a god warrior, the guy understands all skills even at the divine level. But if he wants to gain power, he needs to start all over again. Sitting in the lotus position in the room allocated to him personally, Adrian closed his eyes and used his spirit to begin to absorb energy, while simultaneously discussing how the skill of an unpredictable fist blade is a rare skill, and it is necessary to learn it. Using his experience, the guy read all the necessary techniques for developing this skill and found out exactly which nuances of this technique were spoiled, and corrected them without any problems. In persistent meditation, the boy concentrated on studying, hoping only that 10 star stones would be enough to help him master the skill. As soon as Adrian concentrated and closed his eyes, his spirit burst out of his body and caught the stone in a weak whirlwind of blue flame. And as soon as he started, his hand burned with pain, which almost brought the guy out of concentration. The flame enveloped the fist, changing color and forming a blade. But Adrian felt it as if someone was scraping his bones. The guy tried his best to restrain himself and not unclench his fist so that the skill would finally take hold. But, alas, he could not resist, and his palm unclenched, and the flame began to gradually go out. Despite the fact that the guy received the power of all 6 skills, and his talent was more powerful than even epic, he realized that he had underestimated such a powerful skill, and therefore would not be able to master it in one attempt. Because during this one time, the skin of his hand turned red and shriveled from fire. Realizing that it would take at least 1 year for an ordinary person, Adrian grinned, knowing that with his strength there was no way he would allow himself to hesitate, and therefore would definitely master the skill as soon as possible. Concentrating again, Adrian used the power of his spirit to once again cause his hand to become covered in bright pink flames, which now took on a much more distinct blade shape. Exhaling in satisfaction with his own work, the guy stood up and with one movement made the sword fly from the wall straight into his own hand. Forcing his energy to again form the shape of a blade around his hand, the guy hit the wall with such force with one swing of his sword that a rather wide crack appeared along it. Looking at this crack and easily moving the blade, the guy noted, not without pleasure, that the skill was indeed very strong. and therefore the time and stones spent on studying it were clearly worth it. Relaxing his hand, the guy withdrew the energy and remembered that even when he moves to the next rank, his skill level will increase in the same way. As soon as he left the training room, Darren immediately appeared in full growth before his eyes, whose predatory gaze said more clearly than any words that he would not leave without blood today. Looking slyly at his brother, Darren took out a special document and without much fear walked towards Adrian, challenging him to a duel to find out who would become the heir to the Guardian family. Pulling out the document about the duel in front of Adrian, Darren publicly asked Adrian if he would accept the challenge, which is why everyone around them turned their attention to the guys. Proudly placing his hands on his hips, Adrian looked at Darren with interest, clearly pleased that he had predicted all the upcoming events and noting how much attention they attracted. With a smile, the guy noted that now he himself had become awakened, which means his entire inheritance goes to him and only him. Not expecting such words, Darren looked around with caution, hearing how everyone around him began to discuss him with condemnation for trying to take away Adrian's rightful inheritance. Hearing someone calling for him to be kicked out of the academy, Darren raised a paper in front of him in a panic, indicating that this duel was agreed upon by the awakened community. The warriors around looked at the paper in bewilderment, not understanding how the community could even allow such a conflict to happen. Realizing that no one would touch him now, Darren believed in himself and again turned to Adrian, indicating that refusal would mean that he was renouncing any claims to the Guardian family inheritance. And although Adrian himself felt angry, he understood that this anger was caused by the memories of the guy in whose body he was reborn, and Darren was not worth even a drop of his hatred. Smiling maliciously, Darren asked if Adrian would agree to a duel to the death, clearly remembering that Adrian himself should now be in a deranged state. Something suddenly flashed in front of the guy, and when he reacted, Adrian was already standing a few steps away from him, relaxingly reading the paper that his brother had just held in his hands. Amazed by such incredible speed, Darren looked in amazement at his hand, in which he literally just held the paper that Adrian now had. Looking with contempt at the perplexed guy, Adrian held out the paper forward and, in a firm voice, answered the duel request with his consent. Looking up at his brother again, Darren looked at Adrian in shock, still trying to understand how he had snatched the document from his hands so quickly. However, Darren was not afraid, glad that they had ruined the unpredictable fist blade skill, which meant that Adrian was about to lose control of himself. Taking a stance, Darren prepared for the attack and was 100% sure that today he would finally finish off the brother who had so bothered him. And although the opponent stood ready to fight, Adrian was relaxed and calm, realizing that Darren would never be able to win. In an instant, dark green energy swirled around Darren, and his blade glowed bright green. And in another moment, he suddenly disappeared in the place where he stood, and suddenly found himself to the left of Adrian, with a blade already prepared for the fatal blow. At the same instant, his energy took the form of a snake, and the blade rushed towards Adrian's throat, ready to cut it and end the life of the unlucky victim. With a slight movement of his hand, the hero intercepted the opponent's attack and deflected it to the side, noting with a smile that Darren was repeating himself in his techniques. Panicked by such a difficult situation, Darren simply could not believe that his opponent was so clever that he had read all his skills so much that he was able to intercept his attack. Seizing a moment when Darren would be defenseless, Adrian used his new blade fist skill. With one blow so familiar, the guy sent his opponent flying. Falling on his back, Darren hit hard, but using his thief's reflexes, he quickly turned over and stood on both legs, grinning angrily at Adrian. There was confusion in his eyes, because he expected Adriana to go crazy with his new skill. Smiling relaxed, Adrian received compliments and words of encouragement from other warriors, shouting at him to show the thieves what they were capable of. But another thief standing nearby noted that Darren was trash and asked not to compare the Thieves Guild with him. Frank stood nearby, contentedly watching the progress of the battle and noting every movement, saying out loud that he was very proud of the new gold rank of the Warriors Guild, because Adrian had learned such a difficult skill so quickly. Leaping forward, Adrian again used his blade fist skill, intending to hit Darren even harder. His blow again fell on the body of his opponent, who, even blocking the attack, flew away from such a powerful force. Clearly enjoying beating the scoundrel, Adrian noticed that his opponent was very tenacious and stood on his own 2 feet even after such strong blows. Straightening up, The guy pulled back the collar of his cape with the hand that hurt the least, showing a golden protective vest that helped him withstand blows, naturally not leaving the enemy without a sarcastic comment about his weakness. Nevertheless, the opinions of others about the fact of wearing protection by Darren were divided, because someone decided that it was dishonest, and someone noted that protection is not prohibited by the rules. The desperation for the result was evident in Darren's eyes as he shouted that he would make Adrian finally die. Rushing forward again, he prepared his blade for another attack. His energy now took the form of two snakes, ready to bite the enemy's throat. And Darren himself, using his skills to the fullest, was approaching the enemy. This time, without even a hint of a smile, Adrian called Darren a narrow-minded idiot, facing the oncoming attack without fear. Again, with a single effortless movement, Adrian used his blade fist to block such a powerful attack without any effort. Darren's eyes showed fear, because he clearly did not expect his opponent to block his most powerful skills so easily. Looking at the enemy with contempt, the guy noted with pleasure that he was only playing along with Darren, who thought that his armor would provide him with good protection. With these words, Adrian used the blade fist on his other hand, which he directed directly towards the enemy's face. Darren, who did not have time to block the attack, was forced to feel the full power of such a powerful skill. In turn, Adrian, realizing that the enemy had lost the opportunity to defend himself, attacked him with several blows from the blade fist. In the end, with another powerful blow, the guy sent Darren flying again. The guy tried to group himself, but this time he simply didn't have enough strength to get up, and so he fell heavily to the floor. Raising his gaze, the beaten Darren looked at his enemy in bewilderment, not understanding why nothing was happening to him. Throwing a contemptuous look at his opponent, Adrian said that he knew everything about his vile plan to drive him crazy, which shocked Darren. Knowing that their duel was to be to the death, Adrian crouched over the weakened Darren and said that he would spare him, but only on one condition. Lost from excitement and panic, Darren heard that his opponent was demanding to tell the whole truth about who was behind all the intrigues over the Guardian family, as well as what happened to Adrian's parents. Having lost all hope, Darren clenched his jaw forcefully, which made the sound of something bursting. Adrian rushed a step back, stunned to realize that there was poison in the guy's mouth, and he chose to die rather than answer the guy's questions. With one last malicious glance at Adrian, Darren told him that he would never know what happened to his parents, and also that he was unable to cope with those who intended to end the life of the Guardian clan. Stunned, Adrian silently listened as Darren said his last words, saturated with malice and contempt. Having said his last word, Darren suddenly rolled his eyes and leaned back, and his chest stopped rising in time with his breathing, making it clear that from now on, Adrian's sworn brother was dead. Adrian felt incredible contempt for his opponent, but also a certain amount of respect, because he was ready to die for his goals. Turning away from the deceased with regret, the guy thought that those who were behind all this apparently had great power in this city. And although he understood that Darren's death would bring even more troubles upon him, excitement and a desire to find out just how strong his enemies flared up in him. Realizing that he still only occupied a weak F rank in the guild, Adrian headed out of the hall, deciding to quickly return to training, but not noticing how someone was hiding around the corner who was watching the progress of the battle with great curiosity. Sometime later, Adrian, being in an apartment on the outskirts, was training with starstones. Sitting in the lotus position and holding the starstone between his palms, the guy reunited with his spirit for the best possible training. In the end, another stone crumbled into dust, having exhausted all its stellar energy. Upset over the loss of the last starstone, Adrian thought out loud, coming to the understanding that his body was indeed incredibly strong, because in a couple of days he had absorbed all the energy of the 10 starstones received for the talent test. Clenching and unclenching his fist, the guy noted with pleasure that in just a couple of days he increased his energy level from 105 to 246 units, which is a truly outstanding result. Looking at the dust left over from the used starstone, Adrian estimated that one such stone contained approximately 10 units of spiritual value. However, in fact, this was only a theory and extremely erroneous, because the average awakened person can absorb only a smaller part of the energy that is stored in the stone. For such an awakened person, a result of 10% of the total energy of the stone is quite good. If a gifted person can use 30% or more of energy, then he can be safely considered gifted. However, without expecting it, Adrian managed to absorb as much as 70% of the stone's energy, which was a truly impressive result. Absolutely pleased with himself, the guy remembered that in his previous life he achieved only 40% of the results, which means his current body is indeed several times more powerful. Having warmed up after a long process of absorption, Adrian noted with regret that on the outskirts of the city, he received much less energy from the stars than he could have, being at the very gates. His gaze became aggressive as he remembered how he tried to reclaim the Guardian family estate, which was rightfully his. Immediately after the battle, Adrian went to the residence of the awakened community to gain access to his estate. But, as it turned out, after passing into Darren's possession, the estate no longer belonged to the Guardian family. Smiling boldly and intertwining his fingers in a businesslike manner, the man noted that after Darren's death, the estate passed into the possession of the Awakened Society, and Adrian was given only a small apartment on the outskirts. Adrian had to admit that it would be very difficult to return his property because, apparently, this estate was of great value to the one who was plotting against the guy. Hanging his head sadly, Adrian also admitted that, unfortunately, he could not in any way resist someone significant, because his rank in the guild was only initial. And another sad thought visited the guy's mind when he realized that he had miscalculated again. He learned that, although he does not have the right to the estate, he will still get the inheritance, although it turned out to be much less than what the guy expected, and it will only be enough for 20 stones of stellar energy. Pressing his fingers to his head, Adrian winced at the headache, noting that he never thought that one day he would stress so much over money problems. After searching his pockets thoroughly, the guy pulled out a warrior token given to him by the guild. With one swipe of his finger across the surface of the token, Adrian caused a reaction that resulted in a holographic light projecting an image into the air. Without a trace of a smile, the guy looked at the numbers indicating his level and amount of energy, and not cheerfully noted that he needed a lot more star stones. With a slight movement of his finger on the token, the guy changed the picture and saw in front of him several tasks that the guild had provided him, and gloomily noted that the rewards for them were not bad, but there were very few merits, and he needed as many of them as possible, because 100 merits are exchanged for 1 star stone. Looking at the result of his research, Adrian doubted whether he should try tasks that were more difficult for his rank. And although he himself understood that he could easily cope with a task at a higher level, he doubted it only because its successful completion immediately after waking up would attract too much unnecessary attention. While he was under the wing of the Warriors Guild, no one could even lay a finger on him. But if he went too far, ill wishers would come from everywhere and still be able to get him. While flipping through various tasks, Adrian suddenly came across something that caught his attention. Touching the hologram, the guy read about a task that was 2 whole ranks more difficult, but it only required exploring the surroundings of the forest nearby, and the reward promised as many as 20 merits. Taking a closer look at the picture that came with the task, Adrian noticed something interesting, deciding that the task seemed very interesting to him. After some time, Adrian arrived in the suburbs where some of the awakened ones lived and worked. After wandering around the territory for a long time, the guy finally noticed a fork and realized in which direction the moss forest was located, which became his new goal. At that moment, when he was about to leave, the guy heard a clear voice from behind, calling him by name. Turning around, he saw Rebecca in full battle dress, who, clearly delighted to meet a new acquaintance, asked him if he had accepted the same task with the moss forest as she had. At first, Adrian didn't even immediately remember the girl, but remembering how he helped her during the test, he awkwardly confirmed her guess. Rebecca, clearly overjoyed even more, immediately approached the guy almost closely, asking if he would then like to join her squad, since they had come on the same mission, quite embarrassing Adrian himself. A silhouette of a man suddenly appeared behind her, immediately bringing the girl down to earth with the assertion that she should have first asked the squad leader before calling anyone into the squad. Coming out into the light, the stocky man noted that for a squad of rank E, a hero of rank EF would be a burden. But, despite the unflattering comment, he still introduced himself as Mark Hoffman. Turning around, Rebecca immediately began to protest, insisting that she did not consider Adrian a burden. The man who came up, hearing Adrian's name, called Mark a real ignorant, because Adrian was the one who, along with Rebecca, received a gold-ranked talent in the recent test. Stretching out his hand for a handshake, the man introduced himself as Howard, and noted that he was the squad's archer. Pleased by the polite attitude, Adrian shook Howard's hand with a smile and heard from him an invitation to join the squad. Dissatisfied with such a positive attitude of the commander towards the guy, Mark said that he did not see anything outstanding in the gold rank, and only looked at the level. And for their squad, Adrian's level made him a burden. With one sharp shout, Howard silenced Mark, pointing out that the knight was talking complete nonsense. Embarrassed by such a pleasant attitude, Adrian accepted the invitation to join the squad and, trying not to pay attention to Mark, followed Howard, who led the squad straight to the moss forest. When the team finally entered the forest, the sky was covered with the crowns of mighty trees, whose trunks were intricately intertwined. As soon as they climbed deep enough, tree creatures began to emerge from the bushes at them, forcing the heroes to fight. Wanting to cover the combatants, Rebecca pulled the bowstring and aimed a burning arrow towards the snarling monsters. With one well-aimed shot, she hit one of the monsters, causing the flames to immediately flare up, engulfing its woody body. And although the shot was accurate, and the flame clearly wounded the monster, it suddenly extinguished it with a growl, turning to the one that had so suddenly carried out such a strong attack. The monster was about to rush straight at Rebecca, but Mark suddenly appeared between them, taking the monster's attack on his strong shield. Before Rebecca had time to prepare a new arrow, she noticed that Commander Howard was already preparing to fire, calmly taking aim at his enemy. The commander's equally well-aimed shot surprisingly caused much more damage, because upon impact, the arrow suddenly exploded, dousing not just one, but a group of tree monsters at once with a bright flame. Deciding that the monsters were dead, Mark allowed himself to be distracted and turned to the commander in order to note how easily he dealt with the enemies. Thinking that it was time for another impudent comment, Mark turned to Adrian and once again noted that this task was too difficult for some F rank, which greatly offended Rebecca, who was standing nearby. The angry girl was indignant, because the first arrow was shot from her bow, and she herself is only EPH rank, which means Mark believes that she is not suitable for this task. But the guy protested, justifying that he was only talking about Adrian. Dissatisfied with this attitude towards her comrade, Rebecca boldly put the knight in his place, noting that if he decides to continue to belittle Adrian, then next time he should think twice before speaking. At this time, the commander, who had not previously intervened in the skirmish, suddenly turned around at a rustling in the bushes. Instantly assessing the situation, he shouted to his comrades, alerting them to a sudden ambush attack. Without having time to dodge, Rebecca barely noticed how a sharp projectile was flying towards her face and closed her eyes in panic. Without straining at all, Adrian intercepted the arrow in one deft movement and, clenching his fist, broke it into pieces, which made Rebecca quite surprised. Throwing away the fragments of the arrow, the guy pointed towards the bushes from which the projectile flew out and shouted that that was where the attacker was. The team thief named Gerald instantly jumped onto the tree and rushed in the indicated direction straight along the branches, promising to deal with the monster. In a couple of jumps, he caught up with the already fleeing tree monster with a bow in his hands and raised his blades to attack. It only took him a moment to cut the monster's entire body into pieces in a few attacks. The guy had already returned, landing springily in the clearing where the team was, and Rebecca at that time looked embarrassed at Adrian, who was following the thief's movements. The blushing girl looked away in embarrassment, thanking the guy for saving her, to which he smiled warmly, noting that they were one team. Clearly angry, Mark, in a fit of jealousy towards the lovely archer, thought to himself that Adrian was surprisingly successful in finding opportunities to woo the girl. Having quietly glanced at the knight, Adrian looked away with a sigh, deciding not to pay attention to him and thinking about everything that was happening to the forest. But there was clearly something wrong with him, and the guy felt it too clearly. Adrian knew very well that the Stargate was by no means the only powerful spiritual force in this world, and that it was balanced by powerful dark energy. He knew that the stronger the starlight, the greater the vibrations of darkness, which awaken in living beings all the most terrible and terrible things, turning them into monsters. And although the guy understood that because of this there were more and more monsters in this forest, he was not interested in this at all, but in the fact that for this reason, among other things, more treasures were appearing in the forest. Distracted from his reasoning, the guy turned his head and saw the commander take out a certain device with an antenna, clearly checking something. After checking all the data, the man took out another device and installed it at the root of one of the trees. proudly telling the team that the last beacon had been installed, which means their task of exploring the forest had been completed perfectly. Realizing that they would now go back to the camp, Adrian even smiled, deciding to secretly return here later alone in order to fulfill his goals. However, Mark spoke up, surprising the others by noting that he considered it inappropriate to return to camp now. The guy reasonably noted that for a regular E-rank task, they would receive too little to divide the reward among everyone, and therefore he suggested moving a little deeper into the forest to find something more worthwhile. And although the commander was clearly not too pleased with such an initiative on the part of the daring knight, he was forced to agree, realizing that his argument was very weighty. In response to the question about objections, all team members, including a satisfied Mark, answered in unison that they did not dare disobey the commander. Obviously forgetting about Rebecca's warnings, Mark again allowed himself a caustic comment towards Adrian's rank, suggesting that he leave the group, because further on the task would become even more difficult for his level. In response, Adrian gave him a contemptuous look, and a smile appeared on his face, because the guy understood that this arrogant knight would continue to try to find a reason to get rid of him. Rebecca, who had not yet calmed down after the recent skirmish, again began to defend Adrian to Mark, claiming that his gold rank clearly proved his strength. However, now Commander Howard has also expressed his opinion, interrupting Rebecca with regret in his voice, and making it clear that this forest is indeed considered a very dangerous territory, and also that he is worried about their safety, and therefore considers Adrian's continued presence on the team reckless. Not expecting this from the commander, Rebecca was clearly at a loss, trying to find at least some argument in defense of her comrade. But in her eyes, there was only confusion. And although she still didn't want to let Adrian leave the team, the guy himself suddenly said that he agreed with Howard, and therefore wanted to leave the squad, although in fact he just wanted to fulfill his own goals as quickly as possible. Feeling guilty for his decision, the commander approached Adrian and put his hand on his shoulder, asking for forgiveness for the fact that they were forced to part, and promising to share the reward for the task already completed for the guy. At this time, Mark, who was observing the situation, smiled contentedly, because he had achieved his goal and now no one would stop him from winning the heart of the beautiful archer. As the team moved forward, Adrian frowned, feeling the dark aura getting stronger, and therefore worried that nothing would happen to his new comrades. There were two more members on the team, whose strength Adrian determined for sure, realizing that they were even stronger than Commander Howard, and therefore concluded that these were secret bodyguards whose main task was to protect Rebecca. And although he was abandoned, Adrian smiled contentedly, glad that he was finally left alone, which meant he could finally begin to complete his own tasks. With one deft leap, the guy jumped over the tree root that was blocking his path further into the forest. Having landed and looked around, he noticed that he felt a strong concentration of a dark aura, which was felt much more clearly here than on the outskirts. Thinking to himself that monsters are drawn to an aura that echoes their nature, Adrian suddenly caught movement above his head and turned around to see how a huge tree monster was falling towards him in order to finish him off. Using the archer's reflexes, Adrian easily noticed the attack, and therefore was ready to parry it. With a slight movement of his hand, he used his blade fist skill to block the monster's attack, and a moment later, rushing forward, he hit the monster, aiming for the body and wanting to cut it in two. However, although the blow was strong, it only left a large wound on the living tree, which greatly surprised Adrian himself. The monster swung again, wanting to finish off the intruder, and Adrian sadly thought that, using as much as 70% of his strength, he could only wound the monster. With a quick jerk, the guy dodged a barrage of attacks intended to kill him, and agreed with the idea that this would also be enough if you knew well the one you were fighting. Standing firmly on both legs, Adrian snapped his fingers and used his magician abilities to immediately cause a small clot of flame to fall on them. In one smooth movement, the guy pierced a bunch of flame right through with his blade fist, causing it to engulf his entire hand. And although the monster, having caught its breath, immediately rushed at the guy, he was ready to accept the attack and show something interesting. Rushing towards him, the guy slipped under the enemy's blow and slashed him across the body with a blade, causing the monster to immediately burst into flames. Looking at the smoldering body of the already dead monster, Adrian allowed himself to relax a little, and smiled at his own understanding that using his own ingenuity and knowing the weaknesses of the enemy, you can cope with any monster. And although he won this battle, the joy quickly faded, because Adrian realized that he had spent much more spiritual energy on this battle than he would have liked. Frowning, the guy sadly summarized that he should learn new skills as soon as possible. Otherwise, he won't go far. Suddenly, a sphere of his soul flew out of his smoldering body, full of energy, which Adrian immediately noticed. At the same instant, this sphere flew up to his mouth, and Adrian, opening it, swallowed it, feeling how his whole body was again saturated with energy from it. Adrian straightened up again and smiled, glad that he had acquired such a useful talent, which allowed him to absorb the souls of defeated enemies, not only restoring the strength spent in battle, but also becoming even stronger. Approaching the ashes of the defeated enemy, Adrian noticed something unusual and knelt down next to the curious object. Having picked up a stone full of dark energy from the ground, Adrian noted, not without interest, that the further he moves into the forest, the more often he finds similar stones in the corpses of defeated monsters. Having examined the next stone from all sides, the guy remembered that he had read that such stones contain the energy of stars, although 10 times less than in star stones. And in addition to this energy, they are filled with a dark aura, which makes them dangerous for ordinary people. Smiling at the unexpected discovery, the guy thought that for any awakened person, the stones would be absolutely useless. But for him, this is far from the case. Sitting in the lotus position, Adrian concentrated on the stone, and it soared in the air right above his palm, sparkling with the energy that overwhelmed him. Just in time, Adrian knew a special technique that made it possible to get rid of the dark aura inside the stone and cleanse the energy of the stars, which the guy himself could absorb, and therefore he, clenching his fist, broke the stone into small fragments. While he was busy purifying and absorbing energy, several more tree monsters lurked in the bushes not far from him. Naturally, the archer's reflexes helped the guy spot them, and therefore, having quickly finished his ritual, he even smiled, realizing that he would now receive even more stones he needed. Straightening up to his full height, he once again combined the blade fist technique and the magic flame, preparing to take on even multiple enemies at once. If he had looked around, he would have seen that the monsters had truly surrounded him and were about to feast on his flesh. But the guy was not going to give them such an opportunity. Overwhelmed by the thirst for a good fight, the guy himself rushed into the attack, showering his enemies with a flurry of fiery blows that left terrifying wounds on the tree monsters. Those who survived Adrian's attacks could no longer fight, but most were instantly covered in flames, devouring the monsters' wooden bodies in an instant. Hadrian felt unsurpassed, remembering those exciting times when, as a god warrior, he fought entire armies single-handedly. And the thought of this almost cost him his life, because in an instant he discovered that alien claws were a couple of centimeters from his face. Using all his reflexes, Adrian managed to dodge, causing the enemy attack to fly past. The flame around his hand went out, and in a couple of jumps, Adrian found himself at a relatively safe distance from the monsters, realizing that he had become too lost in the heat of battle. And although he dealt with them well, he did not escape the fact that there were more and more monsters. However, Adrian was not going to give up so easily to some tree monsters, and therefore he called upon the souls of the already fallen monsters in order to replenish his strength and rush into battle again. Having regained his energy, Adrian felt as if he had not been fighting for the last few minutes, but was relaxing and resting, and therefore was full of strength to continue the fight. Dodging the deadly attacks, the guy spun in a fiery whirlwind, burning more and more monsters rushing towards him for their own death. After several minutes of fierce battle, Adrian was finally able to breathe, looking with a smile at the smoldering corpses surrounding him, from which dark stones poured out, which the guy picked up and cleaned with pleasure, intending to absorb them. Suddenly, the archer's reflexes began to work again, drawing the guy's attention to the unnatural phenomenon. Turning around, he saw how the corpses of defeated enemies suddenly soared into the air and flew somewhere into the thicket of the forest. Frowning, Adrian voiced out loud the thought that everything that was happening in this forest seemed stranger and stranger to him. Looking around, the guy listened to the rustling of branches and leaves around, expecting that something was about to jump out at him again. However, without waiting for danger, the guy straightened up and looked at the tree closest to him, which seemed to be moving. At the same moment as he noticed it, the branches of this tree with incredible speed began to close around him, as if wanting to squeeze him between themselves. Not wanting such a death for himself, the guy again used the blade fist skill to protect himself from a sudden attack. The window created with the help of the skill was just enough to dodge the attack, and therefore the branches only grabbed the stone next to which the guy was standing, grinding it into small pebbles. Jumping out of the tenacious grip, the guy noticed that the power of even an ordinary tree in this forest was simply amazing. And although just a few minutes ago Adrian had dealt with a whole group of tree creatures, now, seeing the mighty living tree, he understood that he could not do anything to him, being just an F-rank warrior. Realizing the full extent of his own powerlessness in front of this terrifying creature, the guy admitted without a shadow of joy that he could only dodge so as not to be killed. Standing tall and ready to defend himself, Adrian used one of the techniques he had learned in his previous life to gain an advantage. The technology slowed down all the processes inside the guy's body, because of which the movements became almost indistinguishable to the eye, and therefore the guy now seemed like a statue, which could have been a great help if the tree was guided by movements. Deciding that due to the lack of eyes, trees record vibrations from movements when choosing the direction of attack, and therefore his plan worked perfectly. Being in a motionless state, Adrian only moved his eyes, trying to find a way out of the current difficult situation, and at the same time reasoning that the forest had mutated too much due to dark energy. Realizing that only destroying the source of this dark energy could save the forest, the guy estimated the size of its territory and sighed sadly, realizing that the search would take a lot of time. At one point, the archer's reflexes helped the guy notice another sharp movement of the branches, which suddenly rushed straight towards him, which Adrian had not expected. However, believing in his plan, the guy remained motionless, and the branches flew past him, clearly aiming at something else. A loud sound of whipping blows rang out across the forest as branches rushed towards something humanoid, quickly running away from danger. The small, arboreal humanoid ran away in panic from the branches of a mighty tree who wanted to tear him into pieces. Adrian looked in the direction where the sounds of destruction were coming from, and peered at the small silhouette, cowering from the fear of death. Clutching his head, the baby tried to hide from such frightening branches, emitting plaintive sounds reminiscent of the crackling of bushes. Apparently these sounds and the baby's trembling were clearly felt by the tree, and therefore the branches again rushed straight at him, wanting to tear him into small planks. An eerie crashing sound was heard throughout the entire forest, with which the branches struck their target in a sweeping manner. However, there was no small tree creature at the point of impact, because Adrian, having taken off from his place, reached him in one jump, and, picking him up, carried him away from the terrible tree. The branches scoured the site of the impact, wanting to find the baby's body and devour it. But there was nothing there except ruined soil and stones. Opening his eyes, the tree baby looked up pitifully and terribly at the one who saved him. Using the technique again, Adrian slowed down his movements so as not to suddenly find himself again under attack from the branches, and the baby in his arms again crackled something in his tree language. Slowly lowering his gaze and making sure that the branches did not react to this, Adrian spoke quietly, noting that a large amount of stellar energy was felt in the baby, untouched by the dark aura, and then asked if he understood his savior. Smiling rather sweetly, the baby rattled affirmatively and nodded his head, making it clear that he understood everything perfectly. Smiling, Adrian noticed that the rescued creature was quite smart, because it not only understood his speech, but even thanked him for saving him. Deciding to take a risk, the guy directly asked if the kid knew where the source of the dark aura was in this forest, to which the creature actively nodded. Turning around, the baby pointed somewhere further into the thicket of the forest, clearly wanting to help his savior. Rejoicing at his unexpected ally, the guy was honestly surprised that this kid not only knew where the source of the aura was, but was also urging him on. Having looked around and realizing that the branches of the living tree were quite far away, the guy gathered his strength and rushed forward to where the tree crumb was pointing him. Somewhere in another part of the forest, several tree creatures were eagerly attacking a bulky shield protected by an unusual aura. Holding back the enemy's onslaught, Mark shouted to the commander about his readiness to maneuver. At the same instant, an arrow enveloped in the magician's flame flew towards him, which, flying past his shoulder, pierced one of the creatures and instantly exploded, without, however, touching the knight covered with a shield. However, one of the creatures suddenly jumped out of the column of flame without being wounded by it and rushed at the magician. And at the same instant, he was shot down right in flight by a well-aimed shot with a fiery arrow fired from the bow of Commander Gordon. Turning to the team, Mark noticed the commander's face, tense from the sudden danger, having just saved the life of an ally. Having relaxed, the knight approached Rebecca, who had been closely following the progress of the battle all this time, and told her to remember how to properly deal with such monsters, not forgetting to note that without the burden of Adrian, they were moving much faster. Frowning with displeasure and still angry that Adrian was kicked out on his initiative, Rebecca gave the guy a dissatisfied look, wondering how he could behave so arrogantly. And although she honestly tried to think about the enemies and the task, her thoughts returned to Adrian, and the girl confusedly thought that his powers were clearly much more powerful than he had shown in teamwork. Suddenly, Gerald, looking somewhere towards the trees, called the commander, claiming that he felt that something was wrong. Turning to Howard, the thief pointed to the battlefield, where there were absolutely no bodies of killed monsters left. With a slight but obvious trembling in his voice, the guy, alert, pointed out this fact to the commander. Noticing some movement out of the corner of his eye, Gerald suggested that the forest was absorbing the bodies of monsters. And when he looked up, he saw that the branches of the huge trees surrounding them seemed to come to life. Raising his head in surprise, the stunned Mark saw how some branches rushed towards him with extraordinary speed. In an instant, strong and thick branches entwined the body of the knight, who screamed pleas for help towards his commander. However, before anyone had time to react, the branches sharply compressed, squeezing the body of the daring knight, causing blood to splash out of his mouth, and Mark himself let out an inhuman cry full of pain. Commander Howard was about to rush to the aid of his comrade, but realized that he was too late, and therefore took a step back, approaching his allies, his jaw clenched tensely. Clutching his bow tightly, he tried to understand what was happening around him as his team formed a protective circle. Casting a sad glance at the murdered Mark, Howard suddenly noticed how smaller branches entwined his body from head to toe. The knight's body changed. His skin turned gray and his eyeballs turned black, and the corpse spoke in a hoarse voice, turning towards his former comrades, threatening them with death for invading the territory of dark forces. With pain in his eyes, Howard looked at what his comrade had become, regretting that he could not save him and summing up that the demonic tree had devoured Mark's soul and taken his body. Rebecca asked in a panic how it was possible for a rank E tree to be able to kill an awakened one of the same level so easily. But the demonic knight had already rushed to attack his former comrades. Realizing that it was no longer Mark in front of him, Commander Howard pulled his bow and aimed a burning arrow at the monster, intending to end his life this time forever. The arrow flew straight at the monster with incredible speed, ready to burn it to the ground. However, the monster, taking advantage of the wooden branches intertwined with him into one hole, managed to intercept the arrow and, with a demonic smile, laughed at the commander's pathetic attempt to finish off his former comrade. The amazed Howard froze in place, not understanding how his most powerful attack, which so easily dealt with the wooden monsters, now did no damage. And at this time, the demon, taking advantage of the confusion of the squad leader, rushed to the attack, ready to kill not only Howard, but the entire squad. For the first time in a long time, Commander Howard truly felt the fear that took his breath away and chilled his body, which is why he didn't even hear Rebecca screaming at him asking him to dodge. Frozen in place, the man only had time to think about how to dodge, but was unable to move a single muscle. And although Howard could not defend himself in any way, the monster was suddenly carried away from the man by a blade-sharp gust of wind, called from Rebecca. Covering himself with his mutilated hands, the monster jumped a few steps to the side, never reaching the commander with its razor-sharp claws. At the same instant that the blow reached the monster, the commander was picked up in one jump and carried even further away from the monster by Gerald, who suddenly appeared nearby. Leaving the commander in safety, the guy straightened up and approached the one who caused that gust of wind of incredible power. And Howard himself, realizing that the gust of wind spell belonged to the D rank, asked if their comrades belonged to this very rank. All this time, a magician named Matthew, who had been helping only with low-rank spells, threw back his hood and admitted with a sigh that he did not want him and Gerald to be discovered so easily. Rebecca, who began to guess what was happening, looked at the thief and the magician, wanting to ask a question that suddenly appeared in her head. But Matthew interrupted her. Glancing briefly at the girl with his golden eyes, the man confirmed her unspoken guess. saying that they were sent by the Rebecca family to protect her. The archer's gaze clearly showed the pain that arose from the realization that even her own family did not believe in her strength. Realizing that now was not the time for conversation, Gerald rushed into battle, assuring his ward that everything would be fine, and entrusting cover to his faithful fellow magician, who was already casting a new spell. At the same instant as the thief's blades clashed with the monster's incredibly powerful hands, the magician finished casting the spell, and another windy attack hit the enemy, causing the sound of an explosion to be heard throughout the forest. Even despite the teamwork of the powerful tandem of a mage and a D-rank thief, who were covered by as many as 2 archers, the monsters skillfully fought 1 against 4, which caused great bewilderment for Gerald, who was beginning to run out of steam. The exhausted archers were breathing heavily. Matthew was holding his wounded side, and Gerald was clutching his blades with already very sore hands, not intending to give up. It turned out that the tree that killed Mark and merged with his body was changing his body worse and worse every second, making him not just a monster, but a real tree demon, whose bloodlust was visible in every movement and even glance. Even the unwounded monster suddenly roared, and the already powerful body looked many times stronger than it was. Realizing that the battle was going completely against the team, Matthew made a difficult decision, intending to protect Rebecca at all costs, and therefore, folding his hand into an unusual symbol, the man began to use a new spell and asked Rebecca to run when it was ready. Looking around at her exhausted team and the rather tired Rebecca herself, she tried to disagree, realizing that without her, the squad's remaining chances of survival would be completely lost. At the same moment, when she tried to voice the reason for her refusal, Matthew used a spell, immediately causing 2 gusts of wind of incredible strength, cutting through huge roots in its path and rushing towards the girl. And as soon as the magical wind reached the archer, it suddenly began to spin, gently picking her up and lifting her into the air, dragging her somewhere deep into the forest away from the battle. The girl, who had fallen to her knees far from the battlefield, raised her head, shocked that they had done this to her. And although she wanted to return as quickly as possible, a sudden crunch of branches from the side made her turn her head towards the bushes, from which other monsters were running towards her. Realizing that she couldn't cope alone, Rebecca took one last sad look at the battlefield and, turning sharply, rushed to run as far as possible from the monsters attacking her. But even though she was far from the most terrifying monster, her strength began to leave her, which is why the archer began to panic, realizing that she was about to fall. Realizing that there was no way she could escape, the girl turned around to make a last, desperate attempt to defend herself. But before her eyes, another monster had already rushed at her, revealing sharp claws and about to tear the fragile archer apart. From the fear that gripped her mind, tears flowed down the girl's cheeks, and she herself muttered in a trembling voice, apologizing to those who gave their last strength to save her. Trying to shield herself from the attacking monster with her hands, the girl closed her eyes, realizing that she was about to die. But at the same moment, something suddenly attacked the monsters, dousing each of them with an uncontrollable flame, causing the creatures to scream loudly. Hearing the screams, the girl opened her eyes and looked at what had happened. But when she saw the one who protected her, she opened her eyes in shock. Adrian, standing at his full height, turned his head to Rebecca, wanting to assess whether she was injured, although the girl herself looked at him with much greater curiosity, because his hand was blazing with both flame and unusual pink energy. Turning his head back towards the enemies, Adrian, concentrating, asked the girl what happened to them since she found herself alone against 3 monsters. The girl, amazed by the spectacle, looked at Adrian without looking away, and instead of answering in a trembling voice, she only asked how he could so easily deal with 3 E-reg monsters alone. Sighing, the guy glanced at the new creatures that came closer, growling towards the couple and wanting to kill both. Realizing that it would be much more difficult for him to fight and protect Rebecca at the same time, Adrian decided that it would be much better to use a different strategy, and therefore, with a smooth movement, he put his hand on the archer's waist, pulling her towards him, which caused incredible embarrassment on the part of the girl. The girl tried to object to such an unexpected close contact, but Adrian interrupted her, giving her a hard look and threatening that if she did not shut up, he would throw her to be eaten. Looking around, Rebecca panicked again, whispering that the monsters were coming straight at them, to which Adrian suddenly released a blue aura, already familiar to this forest. thanks to which their movements slowed down. Immediately after this, the monsters, who had previously been running straight towards the couple, for some reason ran past and then stopped altogether, looking around lostly in search of the suddenly disappeared prey, which greatly surprised Rebecca, who realized that the monsters did not see them at all. Confused again, Rebecca looked at the guy again, thinking that this was the skill he received for passing the gold rank test. And although Adrian tried to concentrate on the enemies, he could not help but notice that for some reason, the girl pressed herself even closer to him, which greatly embarrassed the guy. In the end, when the monsters dispersed, Adrian led Rebecca somewhere deep into the forest, where they found a safe enough place for them to rest. Crouching under the roots of a large but lifeless tree, Adrian sighed, leaned back on the roots, and again asked what had happened to the detachment. Having scorched the girl with a stern look, he asked directly how she could get lost alone in the forest if their team included as many as 2 awakened D ranks. Rebecca, who had been embarrassed until this time, opened her eyes in surprise, because she did not expect that Adrian was so strong that he could easily understand the level of power of those about whom she herself knew nothing. Shaking her head and throwing out the embarrassment of the guy who saved her, the girl indignantly asked how he knew that their comrades were of higher rank. The guy, who did not give in to pressure, directly said that he had eyes, and he simply could not help but notice this fact. Without taking his stern look off Rebecca, the guy said that they weren't even particularly hiding, because even before the guy left, they boldly used their abilities, and the archer simply didn't notice. The guy harshly reprimanded the girl because she is a gold rank archer, which means she should have noticed it herself. But Rebecca turned out to be so inept that she missed simple information that was right under her nose. Hugging her knees and closing her eyes, the girl sobbed, in a trembling voice agreeing with the guy's words and confirming that she was weak, because if she were stronger, she would not be a burden to her comrades. Even seeing how upset the girl was, Adrian did not allow himself to show pity, and, still looking sternly at her with his green eyes, the guy harshly noted that tears could not help the matter, but instead it would be better if she finally said what happened. For a couple more seconds, the archer could not control her tears, and when she finally came to her senses a little, she spoke, telling Adrian about everything that had happened to them. Having listened to her to the end without interrupting, the guy nodded, thinking about everything he had heard and collecting his thoughts. After wiping her tears, the girl told Adrian that his slowing down skills were incredibly useful against these monsters, and therefore they should quickly go to the camp so that with his help, stronger comrades could save their squad. The guy looked up and looked at her as if she had said the most stupid thing in history, and then asked directly whether she seriously believed that the commander and the others would need help if they left for reinforcements. And although he said that even an awakened E rank could cope if he took the right approach to the matter, he was forced to admit to himself that an unprepared team with only 2 awakened D ranks was unlikely to survive a direct confrontation with the Black Tree. Rebecca sadly admitted that after the tree killed Mark and took over his body, even the well-coordinated tandem of 2 awakened D ranks was useless. In the end, having received all the necessary information, the guy put his hands on the ground and stood up, finally getting ready to get down to business. Turning to Rebecca, who was still sitting on the ground, Adrian called her behind him, asking her to take him to where the battle was so that they could provide support to the squad. At this time, on the battlefield, gusts of wind swirling into a whirlwind cut through the air around them. Mark, who had become a demonic monster, showered the magical barrier with a flurry of attacks of incredible power, wanting to get to what it was covering. The wounded Matthew, whose face was bruised, held his hand in front of him and firmly looked forward, supporting the spell with all his strength, because he understood that as he stood, the wind would weaken, because of which both the magician himself and his unconscious comrades would be instantly killed. At this time, Adrian, holding Rebecca in his arms, landed on a branch nearby and looked around the battlefield, where the demon was still attacking the vortex defense. Surrounded by an aura that slowed their movements, they looked around the battlefield, realizing that the situation was dire, and Rebecca decided to ask Adrian if he had some kind of plan. The girl was firmly convinced that Adrian would be able to deal with this monster, but the guy interrupted her and, throwing a sad look, confidently said that he couldn't handle it himself, but Rebecca could. Remembering how the last battle ended, the archer was surprised by Adrian's statement, because she even doubted that she could cope with simple tree monsters, let alone this demon. Looking sternly into her eyes again, The guy directly said that she should learn to use her gift received from the gold rank test as soon as possible. In a harsh voice, the guy mentioned that she had never used a single skill yet, which made him doubt whether she deserved her gold rank. Turning to the monster, the guy summarized that she needed to learn to use her skill now if she wanted to save the commander and those who were ready to give their own lives for her. And although the girl received her skill on the same day as Adrian, she guiltily looked away, and then looked at him again and asked him to teach her. Sighing, the guy softened his voice and said that she should use her heart, and that it was there that she would find the answer to this question. Closing her eyes, the girl tried to concentrate, and after a couple of seconds, her eyes, from which a golden glow emanated, opened, and a golden mark lit up on her forehead. Looking into the archer's eyes, the guy immediately realized that she had acquired the Eagle Eye skill, which is considered very strong among all gold rank skills. Having examined the girl in whom there was no trace of embarrassment and awkwardness, the guy even thought with some pride that she was strong enough to reach East rank under his mentorship faster than in 10 years. But just a second after thinking about the thought of mentoring, the guy looked away and frowned, not understanding why he was thinking about it again. Because the student from his past life had betrayed him. Rebecca, at this time, not noticing the expression on the guy's face and not hearing a word from him in response to the awakening of her skill, turned her gaze to the monster below and said with enthusiasm that she had finally seen what she wanted. Her Eagle Eye skill allowed her to clearly see the monstrous aura of as many as 10 black trees that had swallowed Mark's body. Adrian gently guided and pointed, telling her that she had to give it her all and see much more than she was seeing at the moment. The girl tensed, and her eyes shone even brighter when she said that she would definitely try, for the sake of the commander and comrades. The mark also shone brighter, and the girl was able to catch all the streams of aura, not only emanating from the monster's body, but also flowing directly into it. She was able to clearly see not only the terrifying red aura around the monster, but even a dark aura of incredible volume concentrated at one point. Having heard enough, Adrian noted that it was this dark aura that was the cause of everything terrible that was happening to the forest. The guy himself examined the monster, telling the girl that the power of 10 black trees in one knight's body is too colossal to fight honestly, but he can be attacked in a weak spot. Reacting instantly to the guy's words, Rebecca immediately pulled out her bow and pulled a burning arrow, aiming at the weak spot and claiming that she would now complete the task. However, Adrian managed to prevent the girl's rash act by ordering her not to be smart and clicking her on the forehead. The guy scolded her with displeasure, saying that she was just an F-rank archer, and her arrow would never penetrate the defense of such a powerful creature, but would only attract his attention. Rubbing her bruised forehead, the girl looked down guiltily and asked for forgiveness for her rashness, asking him to teach her how to do the right thing. The guy sighed and closed his eyes in disappointment, claiming that it was because of this rashness and inattention that their squad got into such a mess, after which he asked her if she saw another way to solve the problem. Rebecca finally smiled, saying she understood what Adrian meant. Snatching an ice arrow from her quiver, the girl again activated her skill to aim more accurately and aimed the tip at the monster. A moment later, realizing that Adrian was not stopping her, she relaxed her fingers on the bowstring, and at the same instant the arrow broke off, flying at great speed straight into the monster. Before the monster had time to react, he let out a loud cry of pain when the ice arrow hit his weak spot, where the ice immediately covered his body, making the woody shell fragile. Following one arrow, a second one flew in, causing even more damage and not allowing the monster to recover. Finally, the last third arrow hit the target, causing almost the entire body of the demon to be covered with an ice crust, and incredible pain was clearly visible in his eyes. As soon as the last arrow hit the target, Adrian immediately tensed up and covered the hand holding the blade with flames, not forgetting to use the blade fist skill. The joyful girl exclaimed in admiration that she was able to carry out a successful attack on the demon, and Adrian smiled proudly, supporting her enthusiasm. Turning to the guy and seeing his smile, Rebecca immediately blushed, after which she thanked Adrian, calling him brother for the first time. And although she was glad that she succeeded, she understood that the ice arrow would not hold the monster for long, which she immediately told her comrade. Having prepared for the attack, Adrian suddenly jumped from the branch and rushed straight at the monster with the goal of destroying both it and all the dark aura that had accumulated in its body. Watching the guy rush into the attack, Rebecca expressed her thoughts out loud that the guy, although he tries to look stern and indifferent, is actually very kind. In an instant, Adrian found himself right on the battlefield. However, to the archer's surprise, instead of saving his wounded comrades, he rushed straight at the monster, clearly intending to engage in battle with it. In a panic, Rebecca screamed, trying to stop the guy from this, in her opinion, stupid act, because his defense is incredibly strong, and F rank would never be able to break through it. She knew that if he couldn't break through the monster's thick wooden armor, he himself would be under attack. But Adrian's gaze said more clearly than any words that he wouldn't stop. The guy understood perfectly well that the archer was right, and that Mark, who had become a monster, may not be very strong in himself, but his wood armor, supported by a dark aura, makes him almost invulnerable. However, Adrian took into account all these details and had a plan to fight this monster, and therefore his hand caught fire again. Realizing that the ice arrows made the monster's shell fragile, the guy lit his second hand, and much stronger than before. With both fists, Adrian slammed straight into the monster's open weak spot, which was covered in ice enough for the guy to break through such a strong defense. The sudden change in temperature intensified the blow even more, causing the monster to scream in incredible pain. When Adrian sharply tore his fists out of the monster's body, the two elements entered into such a violent reaction that a huge column of flame burst out of the demon's body. Despite the fact that Rebecca watched the entire process of the battle, although she admired Adrian, who managed to break through the monster's defense, she could not understand how he did it. Taking a better look at the monster with the help of her skill, Rebecca saw how a purple dark core suddenly appeared from the monster's stomach, which, according to her guesses, was the source of the dark aura. Without stopping his movements, Adrian took out his blade and surrounded it with flames, along with the energy of his blade fist to unleash a final devastating attack. Rushing towards the enemy, the guy cut his body with several powerful blows right in the place where the core affected by the dark aura was located. Looking at the place of impact, the guy noticed with satisfaction that the core had split into several parts. At the same instant, the wooden shell of the monster began to split and fall to the ground, freeing Mark's body to come out. It turned out that Mark did not die in that attack of the tree, and was inside the tree shell all this time, being alive. And now, having climbed out exhausted, he muttered something unintelligible. When his gaze focused, he saw Adrian in front of him and immediately shouted at him in rage, calling him a real bastard. Throwing a glance at the guy full of contempt, Adrian grinned and answered boldly, calling the knight a brat who could not resist the darkness. Not sparing the guy, Adrian sternly noted that the knight, because of his powerful will, has an advantage against the forces of evil and should be the least prone to the influence of monsters. But the black trees were able to take advantage of Mark due to spiritual weakness. Pressing his hand to his aching head, Mark threw a tired but still angry look at the guy as memories suddenly began to appear in his head, one after another, revealing to him the whole truth of what happened to him. Having assessed his guesses and real events, the guy decided that Adrian had set everything up in retaliation for being expelled from the group, and therefore, in a fit of anger, he rushed at the guy. Adrian sighed heavily and once again called Mark an idiot, because his actions and thoughts strongly contradicted common sense. With one deft movement of his hands, Adrian, without much difficulty, knocked the useless knight off his feet and turned him over in the air, deciding to completely neutralize him. As soon as Mark lost consciousness, a dark crystal suddenly materialized in the air next to him. Sighing heavily, Adrian spat on the ground next to the unconscious knight, noting that his soul was terribly envious and ignorant, and therefore it was not surprising that darkness took his body. Looking down, the guy saw the crystal that appeared at the death of the monster who enslaved Mark, and raised it, glad at least one plus in such an unpleasant situation. Holding it in his hand, Adrian assessed the stone, and realized that it was much better than all the ones he got from killing ordinary tree monsters. Concentrating his aura, the guy noticed, not without irony, that a dark aura without a master was trying to subjugate him. And then he relaxed his fist, grinding the crystal and releasing its energy for subsequent purification and use. When Adrian absorbed the energy, he looked around and noticed that the branches and leaves of the black trees around him began to dry out, and the aura weakened. Rebecca, who had been at a safe distance all this time, realizing that she was now in no danger, jumped from the branch and rushed to her comrades. As soon as the magical wind weakened and released 3 almost lifeless bodies, the girl felt the pulse of the magician, who had lost absolutely all his strength, but who so steadfastly defended his comrades until he lost consciousness, and summed up with a sigh that everyone was alive, but absolutely exhausted. Turning to Adrian, Rebecca thanked him from the bottom of her heart, admitting that without him and his help, they would all have died here. Coming close to the archer, Adrian looked into her eyes and said with a smile that simple gratitude would not be enough, which again caused a blush on the girl's cheeks. Rebecca, taken aback by the guy's pressure, even trembled with embarrassment, as did her voice, when she tried to find out what he was talking about, although she herself had already thought about something extremely obscene. Noticing the changes in the girl's behavior but not understanding what caused them, the guy looked at the archer now more sternly and asked if he remembered what he told her during the talent test. Taken aback by the realization that she had understood everything wrong, Rebecca, upset, remembered that then Adrian asked her to keep everything a secret, and this time, it turned out, he asked for the same thing. Having praised her for her quick wit, the guy put his hands in his pockets and casually walked away from the clearing, telling the girl that it was now safe here, and she better not go anywhere while he was doing business. The archer asked what kind of business he might have now, to which the guy relaxed and calmly said that he was going further into the forest to completely destroy the Dark Scourge. The amazed Rebecca, who thought that the core in Mark's body was the source of the dark aura around her, wanted to ask again, but Adrian had already left. Just in case, again using the technique of slowing down movements, Adrian moved through the forest, focusing on his own sensations. Peering at the trees around, the guy noticed that all the trees affected by darkness began to dry out, which only confirmed his guess that with the destruction of that core, the darkness in the forest became much less. Suddenly, from under Adrian's suit, the same baby he had recently saved from the black trees appeared. Before this, Adrian walked straight to where this same little guy was pointing until he heard the sounds of carnage, which is why he had to turn around. But now, after stroking the little one on the top of his head, the guy asked him to show him again where to go. Satisfied that he was safe and being given affection, the baby gladly helped the guy again, pointing him to where the main source of the dark aura was. Having covered a long distance in the direction where the tree baby was pointing, the guy finally reached a truly colossal tree, whose top was without a single leaf, and whose branches were blacker than night. Looking around, Adrian noticed out loud that the environment smelled terribly of rot, and the dark aura was felt much stronger. But the guy also felt something unusual. Stretching his paw towards the tree, the baby summoned a stream of green energy, which was immediately picked up by several leaves from the ground. Smoothly, as if along waves, the energy flowed to the tree and touched it, and was absorbed into the mighty trunk, and all the leaves weakly fell to the ground. As if alive, the roots of the tree suddenly began to move, but without a threat, like other trees, opening a passage to the heart of the tree for the awakened one who came. Delighted that he had such a useful kid as an ally, Adrian smiled and moved inside the tree, noting that without him, he would never have been able to get here. When the guy went inside, the roots began to move again, now blocking the passage, and Adrian asked the little one if this was where he himself had come from. The guy reinforced his question with stroking, and the baby in response again crackled something in his own language, unfortunately incomprehensible to Adrian. Adrian, in turn, deciding that this was an affirmative answer, wondered how such a sweet and kind creature could appear from a place affected by a dark aura. Moving inside the tree for quite a long time, Adrian suddenly thought that during the entire journey he had not felt a single monster. Finally, the guy noticed something that looked like an exit from a long-running tree tunnel and hurried there, wanting to get this matter over with as soon as possible. However, when Adrian approached the exit from the tunnel, what he saw was too much of a surprise for him. Inside the tree, there was something very reminiscent of a human settlement. But this village turned out to be abandoned, and there were no signs of life around. And although the creation was clearly man-made, Adrian noticed that for a human village, this village looked quite unusual. And besides, he doubted that it was the source of erosion, because he did not feel the dark energy around the settlement at all. However, having walked deeper into the settlement, the guy suddenly noticed an unusual aura, which alone evoked a feeling of danger. Having decided to investigate the discovered phenomenon, the guy used one of his techniques to properly examine the surrounding space in the manner of anomalies. Waves of energy spread out from him along the walls and the ground, and then returned, revealing to the guy more and more clear information about the energy surrounding this place. At one moment, Adrian turned sharply in the direction from which one of the waves brought a feeling of strong, dark energy that would have caused great fear in any other person. Frowningly looking into the bushes from where shining red eyes full of rage were looking at him, the guy admitted that this aura was too powerful, and he would not be able to cope with it if he was only EF ranked. The guy sadly thought that he was literally just a little bit short of raising his rank. And then he remembered that he had saved one of the particularly strong crystals of dark energy and decided to use it, hoping that this stone would be enough to raise his rank. The only thing the guy doubted was that he could absorb such a large amount of energy at once. But suddenly, a tree baby emerged from under the suit and attracted Adrian's attention. Looking at the baby, Adrian noticed that he was pointing somewhere to the side, saying something in his own language, and asked if he wanted them to go exactly there. The kid nodded actively, and the expression on his face expressed some anxiety, which made the guy wonder if his little comrade felt the terrifying aura that he himself felt. Dismissing these thoughts and not taking his eyes off the terrifying aura, Adrian agreed with the kid, deciding once again to go where he pointed. Having walked a little further into the village, bypassing the place from which a terrifying aura was felt, Adrian suddenly emerged from the cave in which the settlement began and saw a small tree standing close to a flimsy fence. Boldly jumping from the guy's arms, the baby approached this small tree, looking at it with care and affection, and touched its trunk, again causing smooth flows of green energy that merged with the internal energy of the tree. Flowing inside the tree, the energy reached the branches and divided into several streams which, released outward, were transformed into spheres floating in the air with images that turned out to be the memories of the Ents. Peering into the spheres, the guy saw in them how in the past life in this village was in full swing. Adrian saw a peaceful colony of Ents, whose faces were framed by smiles, and realized that it was they who built this small settlement. The guy saw how these creatures cared about nature and coexisted with it in peace and order, and therefore did not understand what could happen. That now this forest is in such decline. Shifting his gaze from one sphere to another, the guy looked for an answer, but did not find it. And at one moment, they completely began to tear apart, which is why Adrian lost the opportunity to understand what had happened. Hearing the baby calling him, the guy was distracted from his thoughts and knelt down to understand what the baby was telling him. And he, in turn, actively moved his hands, which made it clear that he wanted Adrian to find out what happened to village residents. When the baby noticed that his big comrade understood the request, he folded his hands and made a pitiful expression on his face, showing with all his appearance how much he needed Adrian's help. Naturally, after such invaluable help from the little one himself, Adrian could not but agree, but immediately added that there had been no living people here for a long time, and therefore there was nothing special to count on. The baby looked very upset and desperate, and Adrian, picking up the baby, pressed him to his shoulder, hugging him tightly to calm him down. Making sure that the baby was holding tight, Adrian jumped over the fence, expressing out loud the hope that the villagers were still alive. However, what he saw left him speechless, because any hopes for an optimal outcome instantly evaporated. The bodies of murdered Ents lay all around, each of them killed with varying degrees of cruelty, but most were connected by the fact that they were torn into pieces, which is why there were a lot of splinters on the ground here in the ladies. As soon as the baby saw such a horrific picture, tears and hysterics immediately burst out, because the baby had lost all his relatives on this land that smelled of death. Adrian covered the baby's eyes to block his view of the corpses of his relatives, regretfully asking him not to look. Realizing that it was impossible to leave members of the little Ents family like that, Adrian spent a lot of time burying each of them, after which he patiently and compassionately waited for the baby to say goodbye. Looking sadly at the baby, the guy thought that he would not calm down soon, because he was still just a child, and such an injury was too much for him now. Finally, the guy sighed and turned to the side, deciding that it was better to leave the baby alone now, while he himself went to destroy what had caused such tragic events. However, as soon as he turned around, the baby jumped onto his shoulder with a furious expression on his face, which greatly surprised the guy. Looking at the baby, Adrian saw in his eyes military determination and a strong thirst for revenge for his relatives. And although Adrian understood that this lesson was too harsh for the kid, the guy stroked him on the top of the head, noting out loud that now he understands that good must be repaid with good, and evil with evil. Returning, Adrian stopped when he again felt the dark aura of death, and invited the kid to look around in the manner of something unusual. Looking in the direction where he saw a terrifying, cruel look, the guy did not find anyone there and moved on, reaching the place where the dark aura was felt so clearly that it could be felt powerfully on the skin. Concentrating around himself an aura of slowing down the flow of energy for less noticeability, the guy rushed forward, and the dark fog instantly surrounded him, but did not cause any harm. Satisfied that the disguise was working, since they had not yet been attacked, the guy looked around with special attention, feeling such a dense fog around him, consisting of a dark aura. The guy thought that this fog could be the very reason why the forest suddenly began to mutate. After looking around but not feeling anything higher than E or D rank, the guy decided to move deeper into the dark territory. Walking further, Adrian saw wandering monsters behind one of the trees and carefully moved around so as not to attract their attention. And having moved even deeper, Adrian understood why the monsters were here. Because before his eyes there was something unusual. It turned out that the trunks of several black trees were intertwined together, forming something very similar to a dark altar. Peering inside, Adrian saw the body of a huge black tree at the core of the altar and branches emanating from its body, turning into the trunk and, apparently, transmitting dark energy throughout the forest. Next to the huge black tree, a smaller monster was actively moving, dressed in unusual robes and covered with ritual tattoos, which, according to the guy, was a priest. Hiding behind cover so as not to be noticed, the guy carefully watched what was happening as best he could, wondering what was happening, but guessing that the priest wanted to absorb the dark energy of a huge black tree. Standing proudly next to the huge ent, the priest cried out that he needed a sacrifice in order to absorb his power and finally become the king of the moss forest. Staring in amazement at what was happening, the baby quietly cracked something in his own language and did not notice how his body suddenly lit up because his aura began to resist the dark energy surrounding him. Feeling this, the huge ent suddenly moved and thundered something, which attracted the attention of the crazy priest. Realizing what this meant, the priest raised his staff and cried out about the presence of an outsider, after which he summoned streams of dark energy moving at deadly speed, which began to scour around in search of an intruder. And when they found it, they rushed to Adrian, intending to capture him at the command of their master, and maybe even kill him. Realizing that he had been discovered, Adrian dispelled his camouflage aura, which immediately neutralized the priest's magic, and the guy himself gloomily noted that he could no longer count on the effect of surprise. The demonic priest looked at the guy with hatred and shouted loudly that everyone who interferes with his ascension must be immediately destroyed, be it people or forest spirits. After one of his commands, a whole crowd of monsters rushed at Adrian with loud screams, wanting to please their master and deal with the intruder. Realizing that he could not hesitate, the guy took a fighting stance and used a fiery fist blade in order to quickly deal with the monsters that were interfering with him. Rushing into battle, the guy tried not to take his eyes off the priest, and at the same time, not lose concentration from the battle, successfully destroying every monster that was stupid enough to come within striking distance. Despite the fact that there were indeed a lot of enemies, the guy successfully broke through the crowd, destroying the monsters one after another in incredible combat pirouettes. And although Adrian successfully fought against these monsters, he understood that very soon his strength would begin to leave him, and any confusion could cost him his life. It was for this reason that the guy focused again on the priest, who was shouting instructions to his demonic ears. Remembering the old saying that if you want to kill a monster, cut off its head, the guy rushed straight towards the priest with one powerful leap, intending to finish him off with one concentrated blow. Knowing very well the weaknesses of different classes of creatures, Adrian understood that it would not be difficult to deal with the magician in close combat, and therefore rushed towards the monster even faster. Trying to get even closer, the guy suddenly noticed that the priest was not casting spells, trying to defend himself, but was doing something that was not usually typical for magicians. Instead of using spells, the sorcerer swung his staff as if he was going to hit the guy on the head, which even confused him. Adrian was already so close that he didn't want to dodge and waste time just to reach it. But the magician's blow touched the ground and, in a powerful stream of energy, crushed the stone exactly in the place where Adrian had just been. Having landed irritably, The guy angrily noticed that the strength of this magician was equal to the strength of a mid-ranking warrior, and therefore Adrian was forced to dodge to save his own life from the blow. Straightening up and taking a fighting stance, Adrian watched as the monster with a gesture attracted some plates that looked very similar to metal. Frowning, the guy realized that the battle would be much more difficult than he had expected. Having fused together with metal plates that took the form of armor, the monster, who turned out to be both a magician and a warrior, cried out, ready to take the fight. Hearing the priest call himself the king of the moss forest, the guy grinned, out loud calling his enemy's words real nonsense. Angry at such a dismissive attitude, the magician rushed at his enemy, wanting to finish him off for insulting him. And although the guy behaved confidently, he knew that he was unlikely to overcome this fight. And therefore, he took out that very powerful crystal from his pocket, intending to use it now. Realizing that there was no choice left, Adrian broke the crystal into small fragments in one movement, hoping only that he had not made a mistake in his calculations. Absorbing the released energy, Adrian met a monster that had already rushed at him, whose staff was approaching the guy's head, ready to crush him forever. The guy's eyes lit up, and he himself felt his spiritual energy growing even more until it finally crossed the threshold for increasing his rank. And at the same moment, as the guy felt his own strengthening, the sound of a powerful explosion was heard above the altar. The explosion was so powerful that the hard rock split and the fragments flew away from the source of destruction. The magician, confident that his blow had reached its target, felt the full power of this explosion, was stunned by it, and was thrown to the side. In turn, Adrian stood confidently on both legs, feeling how much stronger he had become, and how colossal the difference was between the E and E ranks. During his promotion, Adrian instantly summoned a fiery fist blade and counterattacked the enemy, which caused such a powerful explosion. But now, looking gloomily at his opponent, he realized that he had not killed him. Slightly hunched over and leaning on his staff, the monster coughed heavily, trying to withstand the pain from the blow. But it was clear from him that he was not going to die. Growling in anger, the monster released powerful clots of dark flame from its body, wanting to finally finish off the annoying enemy. Seeing that the enemy was overcome with rage, Adrian stood up, ready to fight again, and noted with a grin that it would be easier for him to kill the enemy if he lost control of himself. Before the self-confident hero had time to blink, the monster found itself in the air 1 meter in front of the guy, already swinging for another powerful blow. Surprised by the speed of the monster, Adrian slid out of the attack with a smooth movement, instantly destroying the stone surface it hit. Having landed and not taking his eyes off the enemy, Adrian noted out loud that his speed had become many times greater, which meant he needed to be even more careful. Before he could come to his senses, he was already in the air, successfully dodging another powerful blow from his staff. Turning over in the air, Adrian used his flaming fist blade to unleash 3 powerful attacks at once on the enemy, who had not had time to regroup to defend himself. And although the blow clearly reached its target, Adrian was forced to dodge powerful attacks again, because his own blow could not penetrate the monster's strong defense. While Adrian was preparing for another melee attack, the monster suddenly created a sphere of dark energy in his hand and took aim. Adrian, accustomed to close combat, was clearly surprised when a projectile flew at him and tried to dodge, but the sphere changed the direction of its flight right in the air. Scorched by the burning and poisonous dark flame, Adrian collapsed to the ground, struck by the unexpected attack. Falling to his knees, Adrian clenched his teeth in incredible pain as the monster said with ominous arrogance that there was no way an ordinary person could withstand a direct blow from dark energy. However, when he saw what was happening to his enemy, the monster exclaimed in shock, realizing that his attack did not finish the guy off. Kneeling on one knee, Adrian began to glow, and the flame of dark energy began to go out, suppressed by the knight's protection, which now came in handy. When the remnants of dark energy evaporated from Adrian's body, he snapped his fingers and summoned a runic circle behind his back, showing the affected enemy that his opponent was a representative of all classes at once. The monster, roaring with hatred, rushed forward again, shouting to Adrian that he must die and become a sacrifice for his ascension. Thanks to the dexterity of the thief and the stamina of the knight, Adrian successfully defended himself from all the enemy's attacks. However, due to his too strong defense, the guy himself could not inflict any damage on his opponent. Adrian glanced at his blade, which was given to the previous soul of this body by his parents when he was 12 years old, and which was too weak to cause any significant damage. Landing after yet another dodge, Adrian thought of another idea in his head that could work. Using magic again, the guy used the freezing cold to make the blade stronger and stronger. Satisfied with the result in the form of a cold-strengthened ice blade, Adrian stood up again, ready to take on the fight again. Using his blade fist skill on both hands, Adrian ignited one fist and cooled the blade even more, intending to use his entire arsenal to deal with the monster. Continuing to advance, the monster swung his staff along a bizarre trajectory, becoming increasingly angry because of the vitality of his opponent. As the monster launched another powerful attack aimed at destroying its hated target, Adrian easily dodged and flew past, cutting the monster's neck with his improved blade. At the same instant, the opened wound was covered with a durable ice crust, causing the monster to roar in pain again. Using all the agility and speed of the thief class, Adrian flashed in the periphery of the enemy's vision, delivering slashing blows with his ice blade one after another. When Adrian was sure that a sufficiently large area on the monster's body was covered with an ice crust, Adrian swung his fiery fist with a satisfied grin. Finding the right moment, the guy hit the back of the monster's head with one powerful attack from his flaming fist. Reacting to each other, the two elements caused a strong explosion that tore through the monster's body, causing unbearable pain. And although the attack was not fatal, the monster was surprised to realize that its defense had been broken, and the wound was not healing. Taking the blade more conveniently and grinning maliciously, Adrian summed up contentedly that now the battle would go much easier, and it was only a matter of time before he finished off the hapless king of the forest. Taking a stance, he was ready not only to defend himself, but to destroy the one who, in the name of his base desires, denigrated an entire forest and killed an entire settlement of peaceful forest spirits. In one quick dash, the guy attacked again, wounding the side of the monster, and was about to once again carry out such an effective combination. Realizing that he was in a losing position, and that the battle could soon end with his own death, the monster felt real fear for the first time during the battle. Without attacking in response, the monster used its mighty strength to jump as far as possible from Adrian, who at first thought that the enemy was running away. But it turned out that the jump had a specific purpose. The Dark Priest used his magic to cut through those branches that held the huge ant in place in an unconscious state, causing his eyes to suddenly light up. The awakened monster of colossal size roared, waking up from sleep and feeling an unbearable thirst for blood. Realizing that the guy would not leave his enemy alive, the priest grinned as the huge monster tensed, freeing itself from its shackles, and said confidently that if he was destined to die, they would die together. Adrian looked at the monster, not particularly surprised, but he realized that the situation was desperate, because the huge monster was clearly D rank, if not stronger. Concentrating, Adrian felt how the entire dark aura of the forest was concentrated in this one terrifying giant, which left no chance for a successful battle. The enemy, in a battle with which the guy had just had to sweat a lot, now stood at the feet of a real colossus, whose monstrous aura alone already inspired horror, not to mention his appearance. And Adrian felt that he was really in trouble. It was a desperate situation, and although the guy was still trying to figure out a way to get out of this truly tragic situation, in his heart he was ready to rush into a fair fight. It was at this moment that Adrian felt the previously undetected effect of his mythical skill, which made its owner 10 times stronger, but only on the condition that he was ready to boldly rush into battle even in the most hopeless situation. At the same time, in another part of the forest, Rebecca was sitting near the bed built for her wounded comrades, looking around to barely notice the attack and protect them, when she felt the vibration of her badge. Taking the token out of her pocket, the girl touched it with her finger, and a voice was heard from the token, notifying that very soon the rescue squad would reach them. Relieved that help was on the way, but still worried, Rebecca asked them to move quickly because her comrades urgently needed medical attention. The voice from the token had already begun to answer something, but it was interrupted by interference, after which the sound completely died down. Rebecca was seriously surprised because she had never heard of communication through tokens working intermittently. Hearing a sound so loud and booming that it reminded her of thunder, the girl raised her head and saw a huge column of dark energy, so strong that it pierced the skies, coming from the depths of the forest. Amazed by what she saw, The girl thought in fear that Adrian had gone there, which means he could be in great danger. At that time, Adrian stood in a fighting stance in front of a real titan, whose body was literally glowing from incredible amounts of dark energy permeating his body. The guy tried to maintain the firmness of his stance, but powerful gusts of wind and fragments of stones forced him to move. Adrian tried to assess his strength and realized that the monster was still D rank, but the entire dark aura of the forest flowed towards him endlessly, making him much more powerful than he was while he was inside the tree. And although Adrian understood that he was unlikely to survive a long battle of endurance, his spirit was captured by the anticipation of a great battle, and his heart, surrounded by a shell of mythical talent, beat faster. Adrian felt the flames of his powerful spirit engulf his body, causing no damage, but enhancing all his senses tenfold. Finally, the giant moved and, spreading his legs, raised both fists for his most powerful blow. In turn, the flame of the spirit that scorched Adrian's body had already engulfed the guy entirely, leaving him with the last hope of victory. While the demonic priest laughed, standing aside and watching how the mighty titan attacked the awakened one, Adrian concentrated all the power of his spirit in his body, intending to finish off the monster with one blow. Adrian put everything on the line because if he fails this attack, he will never leave this forest. However, everything turned out completely differently than the guy expected, which is why his face showed surprise that was so unusual for him. The huge root attacked the demonic priest with incredible speed, breaking bones with a powerful blow. The blow turned out to be so powerful that the monster flew into the rock with great speed, causing rock fragments to fall around. From where the demonic priest fell, a faint groan was heard, full of pain and disbelief at what was happening. Because of his broken back, the priest could not stand up and was forced to lean on his hands, trembling in pain and trying to ask in a voice full of suffering how the giant could attack his relative. However, instead of answering, the priest, raising his gaze, saw several colossal roots falling on him at once, at a speed that was not natural for such a size, which, upon landing, immediately showered the monster with a series of blows so powerful that no living creature could survive them. Adrian was honestly amazed that the situation, which seemed absolutely hopeless to him just a second ago, had changed to incredibly optimistic. When the roots stopped hitting the demonic priest, his crushed body was driven a full meter into the rock. The huge giant let out a cry of rage and pain when he saw that the very monster that had enslaved him was finally dead. The colossal roots did not stop moving because the monster's enormous rage did not fade away, and, casting an angry glance at the crowd of black trees, the monster ordered the roots to destroy them. Until recently, Adrian himself had escaped from the living roots, and now he watched with interest as they destroyed the filth that had afflicted this great forest. Looking at the massacre inflicted on the monsters, the guy was amazed, realizing that he had seriously underestimated the one with whom he was going to fight to the death just a couple of minutes ago. Turning to the giant, Adrian saw the giant take a step towards him and tensed, again taking a fighting stance, ready for battle. The spirit flames, supported by the mythic rank skill, engulfed Adrian's body once again, ready to fight even after seeing the unstoppable power of this mighty forest spirit. Having prepared the blade, Adrian looked up and saw how the giant took another step forward, which means that the battle cannot be avoided, and it will not even be possible to escape, because the roots covered almost the entire clearing. At the same moment when Adrian was ready to fight, from under his suit a tree baby jumped right onto his head, who, looking sternly at the giant, aggressively crackled something in his tongue, spreading his paws as if protecting the guy with his body. The green energy of the forest spirit lit up in the baby's eyes, just like that time when he connected his soul with the energy flowing in the small tree near the fence. Stretching out his hand to two friends so different from each other, the giant again revived the roots which, like snakes, surrounded both him and Adrian and the baby. Seeing how the roots cut off any path to salvation, Adrian doubted whether a skill that increased his strength tenfold would help him cope with such a formidable enemy. However, the flame of the skill went out in an instant, as soon as Adrian saw something that he did not expect even more than an attack on the demonic priest. Stretching his arms out to the sides, the giant pierced his own body with huge living roots, which incredibly surprised the one who, just a few minutes ago, was ready to fight the Colossus to the death. As the roots crawled out of the titanic body, huge streams of dark energy began to leave his body, and small fragments of life-giving green force began to appear around him. Struck by his own attack, the giant still stood on his strong legs. But in the end, his strength left him in the same way as the dark aura, because of which the Colossus staggered and, rolling his eyes, fell on his back, causing a sound similar in volume to a thunderclap. Streams of green energy around the giant transformed into the very spheres of memories that the tree baby had recently evoked when touching his tree. Looking into these spheres, Adrian finally learned how corruption conquered this mighty forest, namely under the influence of that same demonic priest who brought the dark spirits, whose madness affected the nature around. Having appeared with them in the settlement of peaceful Ents, the priest demanded that they give him their shrine, around which the settlement was built. He invited the spirits to join him in exchange for life, but the proud tree spirits responded with a formidable refusal, ready to fight for their home, relatives, and shrine. And although they fought with all their might, the odds were clearly not on the side of the good spirits, and therefore one of them, having found a soul that was supposed to turn into a new tree spirit, infused it into a small tree in the hope that at least it would survive this attack. Having hidden the soul of the baby, the Ent desperately rushed into battle. But after a couple of moments, the black spirit pierced his body with its spear at one order of the demonic priest. Adrian watched with pity the extermination of the people of peaceful tree spirits, realizing that it was because of this tree spirit that sacrificed itself that the baby survived the attack. Seeing what had happened, the tree baby, in whom just a minute ago the determination to protect his human comrade was burning, began to cry bitterly. However, suddenly, from the energy of the sphere of memories, the spirit of the very Ent who saved the baby's soul materialized, and, stroking the baby on the top of the head, with a warm smile asked him not to cry and to look into the future with a smile. Turning to Adrian, the spirit smiled, but the guy saw sadness in his eyes when he asked not to abandon the baby and treat him kindly. In response to the last will of the forest spirit, Adrian bowed to him, saying out loud that even though they were not people, the guy respected their dedication and courage with which they fought for their forest. While the baby was crying on the top of his head, Adrian straightened up and with all his pride said that he would definitely take care of the tree baby. Having heard what he so wanted to hear before death, the spirit smiled joyfully, and within a moment, his soul melted into the air. Realizing that the dark aura no longer affected the forest, Adrian helped the tree baby bury the last and bravest forest spirit. From the moment the picture of the death of his relatives opened before their eyes, the forest baby did not stop crying. And now he stood in front of the grave, wiping tears from his cheeks. In turn, Adrian, trying to cope with regret, turned his gaze to the cleansed sanctuary, which now looked as if it was the center of all the life force of the forest of moss. Approaching the place where the demonic priest was driven into the ground by several powerful roots at once, Adrian noted out loud that he was not surprised by the fact that it was here that the dark energy was able to gain influence over the entire forest. Having pulled out the absolutely broken body of the demonic priest, Adrian noticed something very interesting with curiosity. Adrian managed to remove the surviving helmet, bracers, and armor of the demonic priest without a single scratch, which could still be used in the future. Looking at the staff that the magician wielded so skillfully, Adrian thought that he himself did not need this staff, but it could be safely sold on the black market. The only problem that the guy faces is the fact that he simply cannot carry it all in one hand. Having examined the priest again in case he had missed something, Adrian was surprised to note that he had completely lost sight of the last incredibly useful item. Noticing with satisfaction that this item would perfectly solve the problem that had arisen, Adrian picked up the priest's headband, which conveniently contained a spatial pocket. Smiling contentedly and remembering all the items that he had taken from the priest, Adrian placed them all inside the spatial pocket, thinking that the incredibly useful items he received were as many as 10 dark stones that would help him further increase his strength. However, the most useful, without a doubt, could be considered the spatial pocket itself, which you can keep for yourself and store a lot of useful items in it. The only thing that confused Adrian was that the spatial pocket was a rather rare artifact that even C-rank heroes could rarely afford, and therefore it was surprising that some demonic priest of only D rank had it. Throwing aside serious thoughts, the guy shook his head and allowed himself to relax, because just recently he thought that death awaited him, and therefore he could think about something less important, such as the fact that the bandage looked incredibly unreliable, and she We'll definitely have to do it later. Finally, a tree kid approached Adrian, sadly hanging his head, and the guy asked him if he had said goodbye to his relatives. Nodding affirmatively, the forest baby jumped onto Adrian's shoulder, who smiled at the baby's readiness to move on. Patting the baby on the head, Adrian told him with affection in his voice that he would definitely take care of him and teach him everything that he himself knew. At the same time, Rebecca established a connection, and a voice was heard from the token, indicating that D-rank energy had been detected somewhere in the forest, which could be very dangerous. Looking worriedly into the depths of the forest, the girl thought that Adrian had left for quite a long time and still had not returned, which made the archer very worried. However, at the same instant, as if in response to her thoughts, something flashed between the trees, moving in her direction with incredible speed, calling Adrian brother again. The girl was noticeably happy when she realized that her worries were in vain, and the guy returned without a single scratch. Blushing in front of the guy in whom the girl had a clear interest, the girl informed him that a rank D mutation had been noticed in the forest, to which Adrian only calmly smiled. Instead of thinking about mutations, Adrian became more interested in whether the evacuation team would arrive soon. Sitting down next to the sleeping squad, Adrian asked Rebecca not to forget the promise she made to him. After making sure that the girl nodded in agreement, the guy lay down next to the others, relaxed his body, and closed his eyes. Rebecca's gaze became a little worried again. And then, with a sigh, she finally realized that he was trying to pretend that he had lost consciousness. At the same moment, turning towards the forest, Rebecca noticed the approach of silhouettes that turned out to be familiar to her. In front of Rebecca, her mentor stood at his full height, accompanied by several other awakened ones. For some reason unknown to Rebecca, the mentor, even after seeing as many as 4 unconscious bodies, said that the most important thing was Rebecca's safety. Having ordered several people from the rescue squad to help the wounded and Rebecca get out of the forest, the guardian archer himself called those remaining behind him to find out the cause of the mutation. Rebecca managed to cast a worried glance at them when the squad moved in quick jerks between the trees and disappeared into the thicket. After some time, the rescue team and the victims reached the awakened camp on the outskirts of the city. As soon as the rescuers left the medical department, leaving the wounded alone with Rebecca, Adrian opened his eyes and stood up, stretching and preparing to leave. Rebecca tried to stop the guy and talk to him since they were alone, but came across an uninterested look. Turning gloomily, the guy interrupted her and told her commander to send the reward for exploring the forest to him personally. Before Rebecca had time to say a word in response, Adrian walked out, slamming the door behind him, causing the girl to grumble displeasedly, cross her arms over her chest offendedly. At this time, her tokens suddenly vibrated, and then the mentor's voice was heard from it, asking if the archer had met other awakened ones in the forest. Embarrassed by the realization that she needed to keep the guy's secret, the girl said bluntly that she had not seen anyone. In response, there was surprise in the man's voice, because the team reached the altar and saw that it had already been cleared, and only a squad of at least D rank could do this. Rebecca gloomily looked from the token to the door, and in her head there was only the question of how Adrian could cope alone because he had recently become awake. Adrian himself finally reached his area, reasoning that although he has quite a lot of dark crystals, he is extremely lacking in other resources. Warming up along the way and looking around with a smile, Adrian noticed with satisfaction that he was able not only to successfully complete the assigned tasks, but also to better understand his abilities. Realizing how much he could now do and how powerful he had become, the guy firmly decided that he needed to learn new skills as soon as possible. Suddenly, from under the guy's suit, a tree baby emerged and rattled something in his own language. Although the guy began to understand him a little, and therefore clearly understood that the little one wanted to eat. Patting the baby on the head with his finger, Adrian thought about what he actually eats. However, at one moment, the guy saw something that could change his plans for the coming day. The familiar face of the same man who helped Darren throw the guy in whose body Adrian now lived from his own home. In the administration, Adrian learned that this scoundrel was not just a lawyer, but the manager of the Awakened Society. And also that it was he who took over the management of the guy's mansion after Darren's death. Noticing Adrian, the man, whose name turned out to be Michael, turned to him with a cheeky smile, saying that it was exactly him that the man had been waiting for. Michael sarcastically remarked that the Guardian family's house was truly wonderful, and how sorry he was that Adrian had lost it. To which the guy smiled, recommending that he enjoy it while he could. And although he looked friendly in appearance, In his heart, the guy despised Michael, remembering that no one had behaved so arrogantly towards him for a very long time. Not wanting to further communicate with the scoundrel, the guy came to the black market, where he was originally going to get. First of all, the guy decided that he needed to evaluate and sell what he received on the assignment. And only then he could go shopping. On the way, the guy grabbed some food for the tree baby. But now, for some reason, he again heard a dissatisfied crackling sound from under the suit. The tree baby winced and spat out the pieces of burger he had bitten off, still sad from hunger. Just in case, Adrian clarified whether the reason for the dissatisfaction was really the food, to which the kid nodded in the affirmative. Realizing that human food was not at all suitable for the baby, the guy moved through the black market to a pavilion where something quite suitable could be found. This pavilion also contained an item evaluation point, which was exactly what the guy needed. Adrian sighed a little sadly when he saw several long lines that he really didn't want to stand in, but there was no one near one of the doors. Surprised by this phenomenon, the guy shrugged his shoulders and, deciding that the methods of evaluating objects were still the same, moved there, which greatly surprised everyone around him. People around whispered with laughter, noting that the guy was a real masochist if he was going to enter that point. Having already grabbed the handle, Adrian noticed a sign on the door, which said that he would have to unravel the spiritual scheme, otherwise he would receive 3 blows from the guard. Not the least bit frightened, the guy calmly opened the door and went inside, where a strong-looking man with a comfortable-looking wide cape stood at full height. Adrian realized at first glance that the man was a true professional, no lower than rank C, and this fact surprised the guy very much. The man grinned confidently, noticing that another guy had come for the triple strike, and asked Adrian if he had read the rules before entering. Stretching his hand to the side, the man pointed to the wall, where the guy could see the star diagram itself, after which he invited Adrian to solve the diagram in order to receive the services of an appraiser for free, noting that if the guy takes on the solution, it's better to finish the job, otherwise the guard will beat him. The man demonstratively hit his palm with his fist. Adrian didn't pay any attention to the aggressive gesture, but instead looked at the rather curious spiritual diagram on the wall. The guard said that Adrian could get out of here if he chickened out. Then he wouldn't have to get his hands dirty on the guy. Turning his gaze from the diagram to the man, Adrian smiled sarcastically and noted that the owner of this point, apparently, was not a mistake, since he hired a mongrel to do all the dirty work. Instantly grabbing the guy by the collar, the guard shouted aggressively, ready to beat the guy right now for his impudent words. But Adrian looked calm. At this time, the fair-haired girl, who was behind the wall and was previously bored without work, listened in great surprise to the men's conversation, noticing curious details with interest. Adrian calmly said that this scheme is quite rare, and with its help, gifted awakened ones can increase their rank much more easily. But there are some features in it that are difficult to understand. In one deft movement, the guy freed himself from the grip and threw the man's hand away from him, noting that the cost of solving the scheme was much higher than the cost of assessing his weapon. Noting that this was too easily understandable a scam, and that the owner of this item simply did not want to pay for deciphering the scheme, Adrian grinned, which caused the furious indignation of the guard. One glance at the diagram was enough for Adrian to say with confidence that the owner of this man would soon die, because when using the Stargate, a lot of spiritual energy would probably burst out of him. At the same instant, the man rushed forward with his hand raised, intending to strike a powerful blow at the insolent person who dared to insult his owner. However, a calm and clear female voice, suddenly heard from behind the partition, called on the guard to stop. Taken aback by the sudden order, the man turned to the girl who had come out, not understanding why she stopped him. A rather attractive blonde girl who appeared in front of Adrian turned to the guy, saying that she would be very grateful to him if Adrian would help her. The man suddenly exclaimed, asking in surprise whether this impudent guy was telling the truth about the state of her health. Grinning, Adrian had already turned around and moved towards the door, only saying that this work was too difficult to do on a simple request. He said that the girl could safely die if she was so greedy. But suddenly a guard appeared in front of him, abruptly closed the door and exclaimed that he was obliged to help. Realizing that he could not allow the guy who was able to save his mistress to leave, the man tensed, ready to stop Adrian by force. Seeing the aggression, Adrian released his aura and gave the guy a hard look, asking if he really wanted a fight. Having felt such a powerful aura, the guard was clearly lost, not understanding how this puny guy could be so strong. Realizing that he would never be able to cope with someone so powerful, the man bowed his head doomedly, apologizing and wholeheartedly asking the guy to help his mistress. Looking down at the man, Adrian took a step towards the door, saying that not everything in this world can be solved with an apology. Holding his head proud, the guy opened the door and walked out of the assessment station without looking back. Gritting his teeth in despair, the guards suddenly rushed forward, rolling on the floor outside the room. Seeing the man suddenly stop on his knees in front of him, Adrian just put his hands in his pockets, looking down at him as well. The amazed crowd, who had seen this man throw people out of his office many times, whispered in stunned attention as he now begged for forgiveness at the top of his voice, resting his forehead on the floor. There was no limit to the surprise of those around him, because they expected Adrian to fly out of the office beaten. But everything turned out completely differently. Suddenly, the girl came out of the office, lowering her hood and asking forgiveness for the behavior of her guard and her own. Bowing her head and pressing her hands to her body, the girl sincerely apologized again in a ringing voice. Turning to her, Adrian suddenly stopped smiling and examined her carefully, remembering that he had already seen this girl before. He remembered the day when, back in his previous life, he talked to a similar girl on the battlefield and heard her threaten him with a warm welcome if he showed up on her territory again. However, their relationship was very close, because in a past life she was Adrian's ally, whose help he always valued very much. Thinking that this girl might be a descendant of his former girlfriend, Adrian asked what her name was. The girl bowed her head again, saying that her name was Lilia Breer, and then again asked Adrian to cure and help with her problem. Hearing the name Breer, Adrian was convinced that his guess was correct, and therefore looked at the girl in a completely different way. Going inside, Adrian threw the girl his items and a list of them, saying that he would help her but would receive payment in the form of an assessment in advance. A few minutes later, when the girl was minding her business, her guard, whose name was Darius, whispered his suspicion towards Adrian, because he was too young. Looking skeptically at the guard, the girl noted that only Lily herself knew the secret of her body. And Adrian, with one glance at the diagram, described it as if he himself had seen how it manifested itself. Rising from his chair, Darius tried to object, pointing out that the guy might be a spy. In turn, Lilia silenced him, saying that she could never allow her illness to become known outside this room, because it could undermine the authority of her family. Darius fell silent, looking down guiltily and trying to come up with at least something to say. But the girl ended the conversation, noting that she should take advantage of any opportunity for healing. Bowing his head sadly, the man went out into the corridor and stood at the door so as not to allow anyone to interfere with his mistress. At this time, Adrian, who did not want to hesitate too much, sat down on the floor opposite the girl, who was also sitting, and extended his hand to her, urging her to begin the process. Sighing, the girl pulled off the top of her cape, exposing her shoulders and collarbones. Confused, Lily looked away, timidly asking if he could see everything, when an unusual seal lit up on her chest, which Adrian immediately began to examine. His eyes also lit up, and the magician's insight worked at 100%, allowing him to study this seal in every detail. Adrian thought about what seals like this do for different purposes, in particular for magicians, whose bodies are quite weak, often use seals to stabilize their spiritual energy so that it does not escape. The seal on the girl's body looked special, and the guy, looking gloomily at Lilia for a long time, suddenly spoke. He asked if it seemed to him that the girl possessed a spiritual pattern inscription body, which greatly puzzled Lilia. Worried, the girl incomprehensibly asked the guy if this was something dangerous. The guy said that spiritual pattern inscription body is a gold-rank talent, which, unlike many others, has a small chance of appearing in magicians upon reaching D rank. The amazed girl even put her hand to her mouth, realizing that her illness was not caused by illness or poison, but by a very powerful talent. Adrian noticed that this talent is quite rare and is most often inherited from ancestors, and therefore among her relatives there must be a very powerful magician. Narrowing his eyes with dissatisfaction, the guy wondered how the girl could not have heard about this skill, because although it is rare, it is really powerful. Lilia said that her grandmother and aunt were truly powerful magicians, but they died in battle with monsters and much was not made public. Hearing the girl's words, the guy suddenly became noticeably upset and looked away, sadly realizing that his good friend was dead. Squeezing his eyes in pain, The guy ordered himself not to think about those who had left and, opening his eyes, said that he would now teach Lilia one of his techniques, thanks to which she could be healed. In his head, the guy sadly noticed that her relative owned this technique, which means he can leave Lilia something very valuable that is connected with her. Bowing her head to the floor, the girl bowed again, thanking Adrian from the bottom of her heart for his generosity. Standing outside the door, Darius frowned with displeasure, trying not to listen to the women's sighs behind the wall. Sitting in the lotus position and trying her best to learn a new technique for her, Lilia had been tense for quite a long time, which is why she involuntarily sighed. About an hour after starting to study the technique, a small amount of energy suddenly flowed out of Lilia's chest, forming a sphere. The tense girl did not notice this, but the guy, surprised, recognized in this sphere the one the likes of which appear when he kills monsters. Having quickly absorbed this energy, the guy thought that her spiritual energy, due to studying the technique, began to overflow, and therefore left her body. Taking advantage of this energy, the guy took out one of the dark stones that he had with him and broke it, intending to cleanse it. It usually takes Adrian about 5 minutes to clear the energy of the dark crystal, but the girl's absorbed power turned out to be so pure that it sped up this process tenfold. Adrian watched as the stone crumbled in his hand and thought that this activity could be useful not only for Lilia, but for him too. Taking all the crystals that he had with him, the guy decided to cleanse and absorb all the energy that was in them. Concentrating, the guy used one of his spirit techniques to be able to absorb enough to raise his rank to D. Suddenly, streams of energy scratched the guy's cheek, causing him bewilderment. Adrian's eyes widened in fear, because he remembered that his body was still too weak, and therefore it was not clear whether it could withstand such an amount of energy. The guy tensely and angrily tried to withstand the flow of this powerful force, while his body was covered with more and more wounds, which could lead to very dangerous consequences. Adrian's strength began to leave him, and it became more and more difficult to withstand such pressure when he looked up. Lilia, who had previously been very tense, managed to concentrate on her goal without any special difficulties. Blushing with tension, Adrian decided that there was no other way out, which meant he would have to take extreme measures. Bringing his hands together in a seal, the guy released his spirit to use the desired technique to the fullest. Adrian's face was already covered in small scratches, and his expression reflected his pain as he began to form his energy for subsequent manipulations. Realizing the difficulty of the entire upcoming operation, the guy used another technique to separate the energy flows into thin threads that could be transformed into new forms. From these threads of energy, the guy formed a new formation of an empty array, ready to absorb new properties. This array suddenly formed right in the air as Adrian used the last technique to store all the excess of this energy directly into the array. Finally, Adrian was able to breathe calmly as the array was absorbed into his body again, and the wounds began to heal, because all the excess energy was ultimately stored in the array. Sighing, the guy sadly closed his eyes, reproaching himself for his indiscretion, and realizing that in battle he would not be able to help himself like that. In the end, Lily opened her eyes and exhaled, releasing all the tension from her body. Looking at her hands, the girl concentrated on her feelings and realized that she no longer felt the illness in him, which is why a joyful smile appeared on her face. Unable to contain her emotions, the girl rushed to Adrian and even accidentally knocked him down, squeezing him in a tight hug and shouting gratitude in a joyful, ringing voice. Darius, who ran in to hear the exclamations, first cried out, calling on the girl to get dressed. After some time, having heard from Lilia about everything that happened in the office, Darius threw himself on his knees in front of Adrian. In a fit of emotion, the man rested his forehead on the floor, shouting gratitude towards Adrian for healing his mistress, and also apologizing for his own suspicion. Adrian was even a little surprised to notice that Darius was even too faithful to Lilia, although the guy respects this. Sitting at the table, the guy raised his hand and firmly said that the treatment was not free, and therefore Darius had better bring him payment. The joyful man picked up the box with all the items that Adrian had asked to be appraised and placed it on the table, also indicating that his dagger had also been appraised. The guy, not without surprise, noted with approval that Darius, as a thank you, even provided him with separate tools for repairing the armor. Looking at the blade, Adrian realized that it was a kind of black branch fang, which was a bronze rank weapon, which was not very good, but in principle, it suited him. Trying the blade on his hand, Adrian remembered with nostalgia how in his previous life, he owned and wielded equipment of epic rank. Adrian collected everything else into his spatial bag with one slight movement of his hand. What they saw greatly surprised both Lilia and Darius, who was stunned to think that even the awakened ones of rank B did not have such treasures. Not seeing anything unusual in his actions, Adrian asked what exactly surprised them so much. Darius immediately threw up his hands, convincing the guy that they hadn't seen anything like that. But he thought to himself that Adrian was truly a great man. When the guy left his new acquaintances, both Lilia and Darius bowed to him gratefully, which greatly surprised the other visitors to the appraisal office. As soon as Adrian left the building, everyone around him began to whisper loudly, noting with envy that the guy was being escorted by an incredible beauty. Walking through the black market, the guy smiled contentedly, realizing that he received even more for the service provided than he had planned. However, Adrian was haunted by the thought that he had forgotten something very important. And then he remembered that he wanted to look for food for the tree baby. At the same instant, he felt something moving in his spatial pocket. Looking inside, Adrian saw the tree baby and asked with confusion why he climbed inside. When the kid turned to the guy, Adrian saw that the very hungry kid had drunk all the spiritual energy potions that the guy had just acquired. If Adrian could fall into the ground from disappointment, he would definitely do it. Although he understood that he himself forgot to feed the baby. Arriving at the Warriors Guild, Adrian, with a gloomy face, reasoned that potions of spiritual power were too expensive to buy constantly, and the baby still needed to be fed. And although the realization that the baby would ruin him in this way did not make the guy too happy, he was inspired to find a positive in the situation, thinking that the baby would certainly grow up to be very strong. The guy was going to look for more tasks, but a joyful Frank suddenly appeared in front of him, saying that he had signed Adrian up for a meeting between the guilds of warriors and knights. And although Frank was clearly very glad that he gave such a gift to the guy, Adrian turned away and said that he was not interested in this initiative. He simply understood that this event of exchange of experience between newcomers, warriors, and knights would bring him absolutely no benefit. The guy thought that the reward for this would be meager, but Frank silently handed him a piece of paper on which was written about a reward of 1,000,000, as well as 10 boxes of potions of spiritual power. Adrian paused for a couple of seconds, just wondering what a great reward this was. And when he finally realized the essence of this award, he tore the piece of paper from Frank's hands and proudly said that he would definitely live up to his mentor's expectations and take first place. And although Adrian insisted that he would easily get first place, Frank laughed good-naturedly, saying that the guy had only recently become awakened, and therefore there was no point in counting on anything. Frank noted that there would be a lot of elite there, and he invited Adrian to gain experience, although the guy himself had no doubt that he would win. As Adrian moved towards the exit, Michael and Roosevelt watched him, telling the hooded man that it was Adrian who caused his brother Mark to die before being rescued from the forest. They insisted to the man armed with the sword that the fatal wound was inflicted by the weapon and not by the monster. And Adrian, who was in conflict with the knight, was under the main suspicion. Sighing sadly, the man stated that if Adrian really killed Mark, then he himself was destined to die, which brought smiles on the faces of the two scoundrels. Having spent very little time walking around the City of Dawn, Adrian reached the Arena of the Awakened, where the meeting between the warriors and knights was to take place. Adrian read that this event is organized specifically between gifted awakened ones, which means that all participants there will be at least silver rank. Coming out to the arena, the guy looked at it and admitted that this place, built for meetings between guilds of different classes, looked really majestic. Once again, Adrian attracted the attention of all the awakened ones who came to the event, who considered him a real arrogant for his presence in the arena. After talking with other organizers, the presenter announced the start of the event and said that the order of battles was determined by the numbers on the bracelets issued to the participants. To his own surprise, Adrian was among the first in line for the duel, and when he came out, stretching his arms, he found himself in the field of view of Rebecca and her mentor, who had come to watch the event. And although the archer's mentor said that Adrian was too arrogant for someone who had recently awakened, Rebecca did not dare comment on his words, awkwardly looking away. Adrian respectfully bowed to his opponent, who, having also bowed, sarcastically noted that the guy would be too easy a target. A slightly plump and rather young knight of rank E took a stance, ready to deal with the enemy in a few seconds. However, The knight did not even have time to take a step when Adrian's burning fist crashed into his jaw. Looking at his opponent with arrogance in his eyes, Adrian told him to shut up if he wanted to do anything in this fight. From such a powerful blow, the knight flew to the side, unable to stay on his feet. Having landed, the guy regrouped and cleared his throat, rubbing his bruised jaw and noting that the blow was quite strong. The people around, including Roosevelt, Michael, and their comrade who had recently arrived, were greatly amazed that the newly awakened one was able to send an E-rank knight flying with one blow. Baring his teeth with displeasure, the knight was indignant that Adrian attacked him suddenly, and that was the only reason he was able to hit. Adrian, clicking his tongue and not taking his eyes off his opponent, thought that all weaklings can do is make excuses. Turning his head, the guy noticed that a very cruel aura, full of anger, was felt from the audience. Having listened to his own feelings, the guy realized that one of those who radiates this aura is Michael. But Adrian did not know the second one at all. At this time, the knight rushed forward, holding his sword tightly in his hand, shouting that he would definitely deal with his opponent. Swinging his sword, the knight grabbed it with both hands and poured the power of his spiritual light into his blade, attacking Adrian. Without particularly straining, Adrian ignited his blade and stood in a stance, ready to meet the enemy's attack. With one deft blow, the guy hit the blade and deflected it to the side. Turning sharply, the guy swung again and hit his opponent, who had not managed to block, sending him flying for the second time. This time, the blow was stronger, and therefore the knight flew out of the arena completely, unable to even regroup and successfully land on his feet. Even the host's previously impassive voice sounded amazed as he announced Adrian's victory. Looking at the guy, the members of the Knights Guild became worried, whispering to each other that he was a real genius if he could become so strong so quickly. Rebecca even blushed, looking at Adrian as he walked confidently out of the arena, thinking that he was still as powerful as the day he saved her life. Thinking that Adrian had received a golden talent that strengthened his body, the girl's mentor sternly noted that she should try to catch up with him. However, Rebecca smiled shyly and thought to herself that she would never be able to catch up with him, but she would be glad to see his back. Putting his glass down on the table, the man in the cape gloomily said that he was now sure that it was Adrian who killed his brother. But Roosevelt and Michael did not even smile. Adrian, in turn, won again and again, always ending each fight with one blow. One of the opponents allowed himself to rush into battle without a greeting bow, clearly wanting to be the first to defeat the mighty Adrian. Taking a step to the side, the grinning Adrian allowed the impudent opponent, who was expecting resistance, to fly out of the arena himself. Descending from the arena, the guy smiled smugly, listening with pleasure to the dissatisfied comments of the knights, who thought that the whole point was in his golden talent. Turning to those who were speaking, the guy sarcastically remarked that they would be better off thinking about why they themselves didn't go after the golden talents, since they consider them dishonest. Turning away from the ashamed knights, Adrian noted with satisfaction that he was pleased with the fact that everyone around him thought that his talent lay in strengthening his body. The host once again announced the fight, inviting Adrian and a certain Joshua rearguard to the arena. Hearing the surname, the guy noticed that the rearguard's surname was familiar to him, but could not remember where it came from. The inspired whispers of knights were heard all around, discussing the person of Joshua and calling him a real genius. Throwing off his cloak, Joshua looked at his opponent with a hard but restrained gaze, while those around him remembered his brother Mark. Everyone around was clearly happy about the upcoming battle, in which Adrian could finally be brought down from heaven to earth. Bowing grimly, Adrian heard someone shout a supportive comment in Joshua's direction, offering to count the warrior's teeth. Having heard who Adrian's opponent would be, Rebecca became worried, and her mentor not cheerfully noted that Adrian's streak of victories would end there. For the first time during the event, Adrian looked serious and focused, because he understood perfectly well that it was Joshua who was emanating from this murderous aura that he felt. Joshua calmly spoke to his opponent, asking if he happened to know his older brother Mark, with whom he had recently been in the same squad. For a second, Adrian pretended to have absolutely no idea who his opponent was talking about, and then, smiling joyfully, he exclaimed that he remembered the idiot who allowed the monster to devour him and kill him. The guy's words caused real hatred, physically felt by Adrian, and Joshua furiously said that he would destroy his opponent. The knight was so angry that he caused an incredibly bright nightly glow, which made everyone around him understand that Joshua did not intend to joke. And although Rebecca was clearly worried, her mentor noted with a smile that Joshua was already at the peak of E rank and would very soon move to D rank. He said that Adrian didn't have a chance, but Rebecca was 100% sure that her brother would never allow himself to be defeated. Watching the start of the fight, Michael adjusted his glasses contentedly, noting that he could be calm, and Joshua could easily deal with the hidden threat in the form of Adrian. Taking off from his place, the guy rushed into battle, furiously shouting that he would riddle his enemy like a sieve for the death of his brother. The attacker's eyes glowed with spiritual energy, and his hands moved with incredible speed, wielding his spear as the knight used one of his skills. Everyone around looked in amazement at this incredibly powerful attack, because Joshua attacked with his spear at such a speed that it was difficult to follow him. And although the attack was truly impressive, Adrian was ready to accept it and show that he himself could show class. Following the very first thrust of the spear, Adrian raised his sword and attacked himself, aiming straight for the tip. With equally impressive speed, Adrian began to wield his sword in response to Joshua's attack, connecting the tip of the sword with the tip of the spear with each thrust. Standing firmly on his strong legs, Joshua rained down his opponent with a hail of lunges, and Adrian deftly moved from side to side, catching every blow of the spear. Having abandoned his first strategy, Joshua moved himself, cutting the air with the tip of his spear and aiming at his opponent, while the audience noticed that Adrian was even stronger than they thought before. Blushing, Rebecca even covered her mouth as she realized how much she admired Adrian. All this time, Adrian was only blocking the attacks. But at one moment, noticing the window that had opened, the guy made a lunge, which Joshua had to block, interrupting the series of attacks. Joshua, who did not expect that he himself would have to defend himself from the force of the blow, even recoiled, gloomily noting that the guy's sword was really strong. Moving easily as if he were dancing, Adrian turned around after a powerful attack and thrust his blade forward, sarcastically asking if his opponent wanted a break. Twisting the spear in his hand, Joshua straightened up and asked directly how Adrian could become so strong if he had awakened only recently. However, Joshua was not going to lose, and therefore was ready to use any means to win. Having fished out something small from his pocket, the guy threw it into his mouth, intending to chew it. As soon as he did this, his eyes again lit up with spiritual energy that suddenly filled his body. At one point, his powerful spiritual aura burst out, being so strong that the air around Joshua's body became hot. Adrian calmly followed the actions of the enemy, who suddenly became much stronger than he was at the beginning of the battle. Rebecca's mentor suddenly jumped up from his seat, exclaiming indignantly that Joshua had swallowed a forbidden drug that increased his strength to D rank, which means Adrian must be saved. Rushing forward with incredible speed, Joshua exclaimed that he was going to kill his enemy, and his aura suddenly took the form of a dragon, whose jaws were ready to close on the guy's body. People around raised their hands, trying to protect themselves from the scorching aura of the knight. And one of the spectators noticed that the guy's spear was incredibly powerful. Grinning contentedly, Adrian stood up and rushed forward, boldly asserting that Joshua would not give in to such strength. Even Rebecca, who knew how strong Adrian was, screamed in panic at him to dodge, otherwise he might get hurt. In turn, Michael grinned contentedly, rejoicing that his enemy was so boldly rushing forward to his own death. With his feet firmly planted in the arena, the surface of which began to crumble from the mighty force of the two combatants, Adrian boldly met the tip of Joshua's spear with his blade. Adrian put all the power of his body into the blow, but the sword, which had previously so steadfastly withstood the barrage of attacks from the knight, suddenly cracked. The power of Joshua's attack was so great that the sword split into pieces, and the spear moved deeper, reaching Adrian's body. Joshua, whose blood was boiling with hatred and a thirst for revenge, excitedly exclaimed that he was able to kill his enemy with one blow of his mighty spear. However, Adrian remained firmly on his feet, and Joshua suddenly realized that he could not move his spear at all. Smiling, Adrian looked up at his opponent with satisfaction, expecting to see the shock in his eyes when the tip got stuck in the shield of spiritual energy on the warrior's chest. The guy's gaze became menacing when he calmly explained to Joshua that he knew very well about all the enemy's tricks and had seen his pill at the beginning of the fight. Shocked and more angry than before, Joshua tried to snatch the spear but was unable to do so. So Adrian stretched his hand forward. Seeing how Adrian was about to intercept the spear, Joshua tried to release it, but realized that he could not even relax his hands. The guy's eyes lit up as he prepared to use his now spiritual energy against the knight. In an instant, a powerful aura wafted from the guy, scorching Joshua, who had no way to defend himself. Using his own spirit, Adrian used Joshua's powerful energy to absorb it and become even stronger. People around did not understand what was happening and why Joshua, who was clearly in pain, did not move. At one point, Adrian let go of the guy's spear and, deciding that he had absorbed enough, rushed to attack his opponent, who was absolutely not ready to defend himself. Swinging, Adrian lit his fists and rushed into battle at Joshua, who tried to somehow jump away, but absolutely unsuccessfully. Concentrating hard on the blow, the guy attacked Joshua, sending his opponent flying out of the arena again. The attack of both forces of Joshua and Adrian turned out to be so strong that the genius knight, unable to regroup, flew backwards into the pedestal, splitting it into pieces. Joshua immediately went limp, unconscious, as everyone else, including the leader and the judge in one person, rushed to him to check if the knight was dead. Michael froze in place, unable to understand how Joshua, being such a strong knight, could lose to Adrian, who had only recently become awakened. Having relaxed and extinguished the fire of his own spirit, Adrian put his hands in his pockets and yawned boredly, saying that the judge should have made an announcement sooner. The judge harshly noted that Adrian had overdone it, to which the guy reasonably pointed out that his opponent was using a prohibited drug to increase strength, and Adrian himself accidentally made a breakthrough in strength. The judge was stunned speechless when he heard about the breakthrough, and was once again surprised by Adrian's strength, realizing that he had reached the peak of E rank. Joshua at the same time regained consciousness and, raising a furious glance at Adrian, was about to rush back into battle. However, feeling something strange in his chest, the guy looked down and saw a strange dent in his armor, which for some reason burned very much. Within a second, this dent suddenly exploded, piercing the armor and once again injuring the knight so beloved by everyone. The judge immediately called the medical team to help Joshua, and Adrian grinned and walked out of the arena, thinking to himself that the wound was not fatal. People were simply amazed, because they realized that none of those present would be able to defeat him. At this time in the Warriors Guild, behind one of the doors, the stomping of feet was heard, clearly signaling someone in a hurry to leave the office. Opening the door, Frank grumbled dissatisfiedly, saying that the head of the guild had called the man to his place too suddenly, and the warrior was going to watch the meeting of knights and warriors. Deciding that he would still have time to at least look at the end of the event, Frank quickly walked away, while at the same time Roosevelt grinned, realizing that the time had come to act. As the man hurried to the exit, he was suddenly surrounded by several people in suits. Frank turned to Roosevelt as he approached and asked directly what he needed, because the man was in a hurry to watch Adrian's fights at a meeting with the Guild of Knights. Roosevelt yelled at Adrian's mentor, reproaching him for the fact that the man sent the weak Adrian into battles against experienced knights, and because of his stupidity, the genius of the Warriors Guild was now dead. Frank's eyes widened in horror when he heard that his pupil, about whom he had been worried all this time, died because of him. Pointing at Frank, Roosevelt straightened his tie and ordered the people surrounding the man to arrest him, saying that Frank could have sent Adrian to the event for personal reasons. At the same time, an absolutely healthy Adrian stood next to the judge, who happily informed everyone present that it was Adrian who became the winner of the experience exchange meeting. People were still reeling from the realization that Adrian was such a genius that he was able to win such an event just a month after waking up. Having received the award, the guy was quite upset, because he received much less as a prize for winning than he had expected. But he reassured himself that at least there was now food for the baby. Rebecca's mentor, who had previously been ready to rush to Adrian's aid, now calmed down and said that the guy was simply amazing, and Rebecca should follow his example. And Rebecca, without taking her eyes off the guy at all, could only agree with her mentor, although she did not listen to him at all, occupying all her thoughts with Adrian. Suddenly, the mentor gasped, remembering the event called the Dawn Fortress, and thinking that the Warriors Guild could now, despite all the rules, appoint Adrian as a participant. And although the girl reasonably noted that he would not be allowed to do this because of his little experience, the mentor said that if the guy were in the Archer Guild, he would do anything to make Adrian a member. Having finished the matter, Adrian heads back to the guild to return to training as soon as possible. The guy pulled out a bottle of spiritual potion from his spatial pocket to feed the tree baby. Having accepted the treat, The baby sat down on the cork and began to drink greedily, smiling happily at the fact that he had finally eaten deliciously again. Glancing at his spatial pocket, the guy again noticed that he looked disgusting, and also thought that he really wanted to surprise Frank with his victory at the event. The driver of Adrian's car turned out to be one of the guild's assistants, who asked the guy why he left the arena so early, and then suggested that it was because the event was not too exciting for Adrian. Adrian said that the meeting was over. That's why he left. To which the assistant was extremely surprised, exclaiming that earlier the event lasted until late at night, and then asked who the winner was. Without much enthusiasm, Adrian, resting his cheek on his hand, said that he was the winner of the event this time. Obviously not really believing the guy, the driver decided to support the joke and congratulated Adrian, thinking to himself that he should ask him to double his training. Finally, they reached the guild, where there were surprisingly a lot of people near the entrance, which surprised Adrian a little. As Adrian got closer, he noticed that most of those present were from the Dawn City law enforcement team. Inside, Roosevelt shouted at the Warriors Guild students who were defending their mentor and preventing him from being taken into custody. One of the students shouted back indignantly, pointing out that mentor Frank had always treated geniuses with kindness, and they were simply trying to set him up. A representative of law enforcement named Hans came forward and calmly said that Frank was only pretending to be a good-natured person, but in fact, he was destroying young animals to please others. Giving the student a calm but menacing look, the man said that they had received notification of Adrian's death and had found irrefutable evidence of Frank's involvement. Frank looked stunned at the people surrounding him, trying to take him into custody, and tried to understand how his ordinary day turned into something so incomprehensible. Turning towards his students, he told them to leave, noting that his conscience was clear and he was ready to surrender if he received a fair decision from law enforcement officials. The warrior's disciples clenched their teeth in anger, but were forced to allow their mentor to be detained, who, frowning ahead, folded his hands behind his back. Finally calming down, Roosevelt told Frank to his face that he had not set him up, and that indeed there was irrefutable evidence of the warrior's guilt. Roosevelt had already managed to relax and sigh with satisfaction, because his work for the day was done. But suddenly he felt warmth from the outside. A fiery fist suddenly crashed into Roosevelt's jaw, confusing his thoughts and knocking him off his feet. The mighty blow was so strong that Roosevelt went flying and crashed headfirst into a nearby wooden support. Falling and spitting blood, Roosevelt swore and, thinking that it was one of Frank's students, ordered Captain Hans to arrest them all. Seeing who hit Roosevelt, Frank, like his students, opened his eyes in shock, not understanding how this was possible. Captain Hans, although he remained calm, was clearly no less surprised by the blow than the others. A cheeky smile from Adrian, who mentioned that he had not yet gotten even with Roosevelt for the last time, asked directly why he would suddenly turn out to be a dead man. Frank exclaimed joyfully when he saw that his beloved student was alive and asked if he had left the event early. Captain Hans frowned a little, thinking to himself that Adrian should actually be dead now, and Roosevelt apparently couldn't be relied upon at all. Trembling with emotion, Roosevelt stood up, asking Adrian in a trembling voice how he could be alive, and then faltered mid-sentence when he began to say that Joshua should have killed him. Realizing that he had spilled the beans, the man covered his mouth, looking into emptiness with a panicked gaze. Hearing Roosevelt's words, the enraged warrior disciples screamed, accusing the man of being the one. Everyone around began to accuse Roosevelt of being the one who tried to frame Frank's mentor. At the same time, Captain Hans, smiling, tried to cover up his unlucky comrade, noting that Frank sent Adrian to such a difficult event, which means he had ulterior motives. The man noted that Adrian was lucky that he decided to leave the event early, and said that they would arrest both Frank and Roosevelt, but stopped short when the guy said that the meeting was, in fact, already over. The people around fell silent in shock, wondering how the meeting could end so early, because usually at such a time it was just really beginning. At this time, one of the warrior disciples who was present at the event entered the doors of the main entrance and joyfully exclaimed that Hadrian had won the event in just half a day. However, when he saw representatives of law enforcement agencies, the boy became worried and fell silent, trying to ask what was going on here. Everyone around them screamed in amazement at the realization that Adrian not only survived this dangerous event, but also took first place. Adrian said that he and his mentor had been following Roosevelt's actions, and therefore had a rough idea of what he was going to do, which meant now was the time to settle the score. Roosevelt trembled with the understanding that all his plans had collapsed, which just recently seemed simply impossible to him. Hammering his fist into his palm, Adrian said that Frank suspected the man long before he handed the guy the modified skill for the gold rank. And although Adrian was going to deal with the scoundrel himself, a man suddenly rushed in front of him, from whom he himself did not expect action at all. Running forward, Captain Hans, looking sternly at Roosevelt, was about to arrest him, seriously saying that Adrian was right, and the time had come to deal with the villain. In turn, Adrian, seeing what was happening, frowned, realizing that Captain Hans would never allow the matter to end so easily. After some time, Adrian was already standing on the top floor of the guild building, frowning at what was happening below. Down there, they were taking away the wounded Adrian Roosevelt after being hit, intending to provide him with first aid before his arrest. Frank, who stood next to him, urged the guy not to worry and noted that the director of the guild would definitely investigate everything as soon as he came out of seclusion. Suddenly, he grabbed Adrian by the shoulder, which greatly surprised the guy, who at any moment expected some kind of danger in his direction. Seeing the serious look of his mentor, Adrian already thought that the man was going to attack him, which the guy did not expect at all. However, Frank, subverting the guy's expectations, laughed out loud, amazed that Adrian not only took first place at the experience exchange event, but also did it in just half a day. However, the man rejoiced so much that his back suddenly began to hurt, causing Frank to cry out in pain. And Adrian noticed that the man shouldn't strain himself so much, and it was better for him to go rest. Hearing that Adrian was also asking for a reward, the man frowned, saying that he was too arrogant, and the reward would definitely be significant, but he should wait. Adrian honestly didn't understand what else he should expect, and why he still couldn't get his reward, if everyone around him was happy that he was improving the reputation of the Warriors Guild. Suddenly, a rather attractive girl named Aura, who is Frank's assistant, entered the room and brought what the man asked to prepare. Thanking the girl, Frank told the guy that there was no doubt about his strength, but now he must test Adrian's spiritual strength, and then tell him something very important. Opening the box, the man pointed to a blue glowing orb, which is used to evaluate the levels and talent of the awakened. Stepping aside, Frank allowed Adrian to approach and touch the ball to make an assessment. As soon as the guy put his hand to the ball, threads of blue energy flew out of it, which immediately entwined the guy's hand. Suddenly, the light of the ball and the energy emanating from it turned golden, which made Frank notice with satisfaction that the guy really had golden talent, which couldn't help but rejoice. And then suddenly words flashed above the ball, saying that Adrian had raised his level to D rank, which was very impressive. Frank smiled in surprise, glad that his student had reached such a high milestone in such a short time. And the stunned Aura whispered that the guy was a real genius. Raising his head, Frank noticed with a smile that Adrian had a golden talent, and even received the D rank in just a month. And there had not been such excellent representatives of the Warriors Guild for a very long time. Absolutely not surprised, Adrian turned his gaze to Frank and asked him in a calm voice what was so important about what he wanted to talk to his student about. Throwing a sly look at the guy, the man chuckled and spoke with a smile and enthusiasm in his voice, asking if he knew about the test of the Fortress of Dawn. Adrian heard from Frank that he was now 100% sure that the guy would be able to stand up for himself, and he himself recalled that the previous owner of this body dreamed of distinguishing himself in this test. The guy also remembered that the Dawn Fortress was a temporary gathering place created in the wasteland by the ancestors of humanity, who went through many murders to build a city. After the city was built, the fortress was abandoned and overrun by monsters. Adrian remembered that every 3 years, the managers of the City of Dawn organize an event there for those awakened under 30 years of age to honor the memory of their ancestors. The man pointed out that under the fortress there is a source of spiritual water, where you can practice and significantly improve your strength, but only if you win the test. Frank said that this test was very dangerous, and although Adrian fits all the conditions, he would take a lot of risks if he tried. But it was clear from the guy's eyes that he did not intend to retreat. Putting his hand on the guy's shoulder again, Frank noted that he would be glad if Adrian achieved victory, but survival is still the most important thing. In turn, the guy thought about how much he could get from the spiritual source if he won, because with its help, he could even raise his rank to C. Having agreed that Adrian, although he would try to win, would still concentrate on his own survival, Frank asked Aura to give the guy his reward for the event. It turned out that in addition to the agreed-upon money and spiritual potions, the guy was also entitled to an apartment for Awakened Rank C, and Frank joyfully handed Adrian the key to it. Adrian, delighted with such a gift, said that it was not far from returning the Guardian family mansion, to which Frank replied that only the head of the guild could help with this matter. Hearing that Frank knew about Michael's treachery and would do everything to help Adrian, the guy smiled and thanked his mentor for such a kind attitude. However, turning away and getting ready to leave, the guy hid his smile, thinking to himself that he had to cope with all his problems himself. After some time, the guy returned to his apartment to continue training and improving. Sweating after absorbing the energy from the last starstone, Adrian gloomily noted that after reaching D rank, the difficulty of cultivation had only increased. Having looked displeasedly at his hand, from which the sand remaining from the starstone was pouring out, Adrian stated that even several 100,000 stones were not enough for improvement. The guy's attention was suddenly attracted by Tree Tiny, who raised his glowing green index finger up and said something in his own language. The guy remembered how at the event, unnoticed by others, he asked the kid to carry out some manipulations on the defeated knight. Approaching the tree, little one, Adrian stroked him and praised him, once again surprised that the tree spirit had such a useful ability. Armed with a new blade, the guy changed into stylish black clothes and noted out loud that the skills of a thief and these new items could be very useful. Opening the window and concentrating on the thief's reflexes and dexterity, the guy jumped out of it, planning to get to his target as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, Joshua lay in a hospital bed, still unconscious after his crushing defeat in the battle with Adrian. Michael suddenly entered his room, accompanied by an unusually tall man and a surprisingly small guy. A man named Vincent was the deputy head of the law enforcement department, and, having seen Joshua's wounds, he easily understood what exactly caused his injury. Michael said that Adrian, although strong, is still too inexperienced, which means he needs to be destroyed as soon as possible. The man noted that very soon he would take part in testing the Fortress of Dawn, and Vincent, agreeing, turned his gaze to the small guy and said that this was the job just for him. The guy in the blue jacket even grinned, saying that killing some E-rank brat would not be difficult for him. Satisfied with the answer, Vincent went to the exit, followed by the others, and the man noted that Joshua knew too much, and he was also disabled, which meant they needed to get rid of him. The guy in the jacket agreed and then slammed the door behind him, leaving Joshua alone. Suddenly, something hit his head, causing the guy, even while unconscious, to wince a little. At the same moment, his body suddenly exploded with incredible pain. His eyes flew open and his veins bulged, causing the knight to cry out. Blood began to flow from his mouth as he begged for help through the pain and clenched teeth, raising his hand. Extending his trembling hand towards the window where the silhouette was visible, Joshua begged again, trying to cope with the pain. Adrian, sitting on the window, smiled, looking at the suffering of his past enemy, and asked him directly if he wanted to live. Thinking that the silhouette had only appeared to him, Joshua raised his gaze full of pain to the ceiling and thought with incomprehension how he, being a brilliant knight, could die like this. However, the readiness to fight for his life shone in his soul, and therefore he was going to endure as long as he could. Turning his head, he saw that Adrian was standing next to his bed, directly asking the knight if he wanted to live, which greatly surprised the latter. Smiling maliciously, Adrian invited Joshua to tell him everything he knew, and only in this case would the guy feel sorry for him, although the knight himself thought that this was just a hallucination. Joshua thought that even if this was the real Adrian, being a warrior, he would not be able to cope with the C-rank poison that was killing him, although Adrian himself noted that he could neutralize it without much effort. Turning his head to Tree Baby, who was greedily drinking another bottle of spiritual potion, Adrian brought a rag to him. The kid grumbled something when Adrian wiped his mouth with the rag, leaving a small stain on it. Turning his head back, the guy folded a rag on Joshua's forehead, which greatly surprised the latter, who fixed an incomprehensible look on Adrian. Adrian did not explain to him that the saliva of the tree spirits contains a large amount of life-giving energy that can neutralize poison, although Joshua did not believe in such a miracle. However, raising his hand and seeing that the trembling and pain in it had subsided slightly, the guy allowed the hope of his own salvation to flash in his mind. Adrian himself saw that the remedy worked even very quickly, which means that all those potions that he drank still paid off. Having more or less regained his strength, Joshua asked how Adrian knew how to get rid of such an effective poison. To be convincing, Adrian released his spirit, and then threateningly told the guy that he could only temporarily rid him of the poison, and therefore he should start talking if he wants to live. Joshua thought that Adrian's aura was even more frightening than Deputy Chief of Law Enforcement Vincent. Abandoning his pride, the guy promised to tell everything to Adrian, calling him Master, if only he would save the knight's life. Not particularly in a hurry to save the knight, Adrian calmly listened to everything that he told him, although Joshua was getting worse every second. After listening to all the details, Adrian chuckled and touched his chin with his fingers, taking in all the details of what happened and noting that it all sounded very interesting. Joshua told everything he knew, and therefore asked Adrian for salvation again, to which the warrior himself noted with a smile that he would definitely keep his promise. Touching his fingers to the sick knight's forehead, Adrian sarcastically noted that Joshua would have to die before he was saved. After some time, the knight, wrapped in a body bag, was taken somewhere along the corridors of the institution by a nurse. Watching from the side where Joshua was being taken, Adrian thought about everything he had heard, and in particular about the Dark Star organization. Frowning, the guy noticed that these people, one of whose bosses is a certain Vincent, did everything to get rid of the parents of the previous owner of the guy's body. And although Joshua did not know the reasons for this attitude towards the Guardian family, Adrian was intrigued, and he was already looking forward to the day of revenge finally coming. Hiding behind the wall, the guy thought that in 4 days the test of the Fortress of Dawn would take place, which means he would be able to break through to rank C, which would help him in this task much more. After some time, not far from the Fortress of Dawn itself, something quite curious happened. The genius talent of the Thieves Guild named Pierre rushed to the Fortress of Dawn along with his mentor, who never ceased to repeat that Pierre was a real treasure for them. The guy, turning to the master, said that he was completely confident in his victory in the test, and also that he was keeping his promotion to rank C and acquiring a new skill a secret. For clarity, the guy created a figure of beautiful pink patterns on his hand, showing how hard he tried to mold his spiritual energy. The mentor, clearly flattering his student, noted that his formation of spiritual energy was truly rare, and with it, he could achieve incredibly much. The man also noted that the last person to do such a molding was the head of the Warriors Guild, to which Pierre replied that he would show how much stronger he was than the latter. Suddenly, in front of the two thieves, a little further into the forest, a powerful explosion was heard, the flash of which was so strong that it reached the sky. The mentor said that, most likely, someone is now fighting monsters there, and therefore Pierre should be more careful because the monsters here are at least C rank. When he invited the guy to go have a look and find out if the fighter needed help, Pierre had already rushed forward. When the thieves came closer, they saw a whole pack of dead red fiery wolves, along with the leader, which was very strange because the leader was definitely of C rank. The guy suddenly saw a running silhouette to the side and called out to the master, attracting his attention. Having peered at the silhouette, the mentor said that it clearly belonged to a young guy, which means, most likely, this is another one of the test participants. Looking at the corpses of the monsters, the guy noticed that they were killed with filigree precision, something that neither he nor anyone else from the Thieves Guild could have done alone. Seeing that the guy felt behind, the mentor calmly rebuked him, saying that in their business the most important thing was to be careful, which meant he needed to focus on himself. He noted that too many geniuses died only because they were too hasty, to which the student bowed his head and thanked the master for his teaching, promising to be careful with this stranger. A few minutes later, Hadrian, in his black robe, reached the Dawn Fortress, cursing that he had to abandon such valuable bodies of the firewolves because he was noticed. Putting aside his irritation, the guy took off his hood and looked at the huge, majestic building that stood in front of him, which turned out to be the Fortress of Dawn. His student was met by Frank, who came forward and asked if everything was okay, and also offered the guy to join their squad as an alternative to his solo adventures. It was clear that before the guy arrived, Frank was very worried. And when Adrian asked what it was about, Frank said with a smile that he was worried that the guy would miss the beginning of the test. Adrian kindly said that the mentor should not have worried, and that he was simply delayed on the road by several D-rank monsters. Having looked at the guy more closely, Frank said with interest that his strength had clearly increased during the week that they had not seen each other. Smiling embarrassedly and scratching the back of his head, the guy said that his mentor was clearly overpraising him, although inside, He understood that he had been killing monsters all this time, and therefore it was not surprising that he seemed stronger. Having said that he had prepared well enough and there was no need to worry about him, Adrian asked how the master himself was feeling after that unpleasant event in the guild. Grinning, Frank said that such scratches would not get through him, and he was a tough enough nut to crack not to complain. Suddenly, the man tensed up and spoke through his teeth about the pain, but quickly remembered that he was trying to save face and interrupted himself, noting that he was not in pain, but just the wound was itching. Smiling at the man, Adrian noticed to himself that his mentor Frank was truly a stubborn warrior. Having coped with the pain, the man turned and walked towards the building, gesturing for the guy to follow. With surprise, the guy noticed that the entire Fortress of Dawn was surrounded by a protective star seal of incredible strength and such enormous size that it extended throughout the entire territory of the ruins. Adrian noticed that there were a surprising number of awakened people in the fortress, and then asked if they were all going to participate in the test, to which Frank shook his head. The man said that the trial of the Dawn Fortress was held every 3 years, and was therefore an important event that was broadcast on televisions for ordinary people to watch. The man tried to warn the guy one last time, and told him that the monsters appearing under the Fortress of Dawn were all at least C rank, and therefore he should be very careful. Smiling, the guy said that Frank had already told him about this 10 times, although inside, Adrian really liked that someone treated him so kindly. Adrian sarcastically noted that it was precisely because of his habit of talking a lot that mentor Frank never found a wife, to which the man was indignant and shouted that he actually cares about the guy. And although Frank was feignedly offended, and Adrian tried to ask for forgiveness, one of the talented warriors of the guild named Vic approached and laughingly noted that the guy was damn right. Putting his arm around the guy's shoulder, the warrior told his mentor not to worry, because he would do everything in his power to prevent Adrian from getting into trouble. Smiling, Adrian noticed to himself that he really felt like a family in the guild, because all its senior members cared so much about him. Frank and Adrian moved further into the fortress, where crumbling pieces of architecture that looked like ruins gave way to beautiful views and striking buildings. Suddenly, mentor Frank's attention was attracted by a familiar voice calling the man's name. Turning around, Frank saw 2 stunning-looking girls from the Magician's Guild, one of whom was clearly the eldest. Frank froze in place, recognizing his old friend Aurora, from whom Adrian felt an incredibly strong B-rank aura. Vic told the guy in a whisper that Aurora is a manager from the Magician's Guild, just like Frank is from the Warriors Guild, and that the girl is a B-rank mage, and they have known their mentor Frank since childhood. He said that the mentor was always competing with Aurora, but had long fallen behind her, and therefore was always lost in her presence. And Aurora immediately asked the man how he still remained C rank. Looking behind Frank, the woman pointed at Adrian with a nod and asked if he was the genius with the golden talent, and then reproached Frank for sending the guy to the test too early. The girl sarcastically talked to Frank, noting that it seemed that the Warriors Guild had no successor, to which Frank grinned and reasonably noted that Adrian was gaining experience here. Angry at the woman, Frank pointed to the other warriors who had come and proudly noted that they were the elite and would definitely surpass all the magicians in the test. The woman did not stop mocking Frank and asked if it would be with their mediocrity that they would crush the magicians, to which Frank clenched his jaw angrily. Smiling, Aurora proposed an argument to Frank, and Frank, in the heat of emotion, did not allow himself to disagree. Skillfully playing on the feelings of the warrior's mentor, the woman offered to supply him with a very valuable potion of spiritual power of B rank. She boldly egged Frank on, which is why even his students began to get angry, although Frank, out of anger, agreed to such an expensive bet. The sorceress, pleased with herself, said that the potion would be taken by the one whose students could pass the test better, and in the end she would definitely come for the winnings. Vit pressed his fingers to the bridge of his nose and, together with the other students, became disappointed in the teacher, because he argued with the obvious favorites. Even Frank himself did not understand how he managed to agree to a bet with such an arrogant person, and therefore now he reproached himself for his haste. Frank was upset, because the B-rank spiritual power potion is his treasure, and therefore he sadly asked his students to cope at all costs. Finally, the event organizer announced that the trial of the Dawn Fortress was beginning. Several magicians cast a spell and a huge portal opened in the middle of the fortress between the protected and dark parts of the building. The participants, gathering their strength, began to enter the portal one by one to begin the test in which they could die. Adrian also entered the portal and noticed that the fairly intact and well-finished building here was a real ruin. He looked around at the huge space, inside of which a powerful dark aura was felt, and realized that it was this anomalous place that his mentor was talking about. The awakened around moved towards the passages deeper into the fortress, and Vic also hastened to say that they too would move on. He noted that it is better for the guy not to go too deep and call for help in any unclear situation, to which Adrian agreed with a smile and asked the squad to try for their mentor. Finally, he was left alone and a bright, satisfied smile appeared on his face, because he could act alone. Having made sure that there was no one left, he himself moved deeper into the fortress, intending to win the test at all costs. With a serious look at the majestic halls surrounding him, Adrian stepped forward, intending to reach the very end. At one point, a rank E monster, similar to a fairly large hound, rushed at him. Reacting easily to the attack, Adrian extended his hand, intending to meet the monster and counterattack. Without straining too much, with a slight movement of his hand, the guy intercepted the attack and sent the monster towards the floor, but with such force that the monster, falling to the ground, died immediately. Adrian recalled the conditions of the test, which clearly stated that victory in it was earned by points for killing monsters. For monsters of rank E, he receives only 1 point, which means he should have gone further and, as soon as possible, find stronger monsters, for which they gave 100. Moving forward, he met on his way entire packs of E-rank hounds who crossed his path and clearly intended to finish him off. Frowning, the guy noticed that an ordinary awakened D-rank would obviously have problems in such a situation. But he was far from an ordinary awakened. Cursing, the guy ignited his fist and prepared for battle, planning to quickly deal with these creatures and go find a stronger monster. The monsters immediately rushed to attack, wanting to tear the uninvited guest into pieces and not feeling any danger from the guy. A whole flock attacked Adrian, and their jaws threatened to close on his throat. But he did not even worry for a second, and only prepared to repel all the attacks at once. Within seconds, each of the pack of hounds was lying on the ground dead, and Adrian was upset because he had only just warmed up. Using the skill of his heart, the guy pulled their energy from the bodies of the killed monsters, intending to use it, since they were otherwise useless to him. There were quite a lot of monsters, and therefore the guy could use their energy to form a spirit formation. Having saved this energy in a bottle, the guy put it in his spatial pocket, once again noticing its unsightliness, to which the tree baby said in his language that he liked it. Rolling his eyes, the guy told Tiny that the aesthetics of the Ents were somehow too outdated, and promised to start training him later, to which Tiny rolled his eyes. Having done everything he wanted, Adrian moved further into the depths of the fortress, looking forward to facing someone truly strong. As soon as he turned the corner, his presence was noticed by the same thief whom Vincent ordered to kill Adrian. And with a smile, he rejoiced at his luck. The guy rushed after Adrian, silently warning the guy that he was to blame for his death, because he had insulted the master. However, at the same moment, the thief stopped himself, because he remembered that his master Vincent had given clear instructions to make Adrian's death look natural. With eyes hungry for blood, the guy remembered that on one of the paths of the fortress at the top, there was a whole horde of monsters, and therefore he could bring them on Adrian with the help of a special potion. Adrian opened the bottle and its contents immediately began to dissipate, which is why the aroma of the potion began to spread throughout the surrounding space at high speed. The guy cruelly stated that Adrian should be grateful that he would be killed using such an expensive means, although being a dead man, he would no longer thank anyone. Having risen to a higher floor, Adrian studied his surroundings without much effort, looking for those monsters for which he would get more points. Suddenly, before his completely calm gaze, several blades flashed at once, each of which was aiming at the guy. From the darkness native to monsters, 3 armored zombies of rank D immediately rushed at the guy, planning to destroy him. Using the fist of a fiery blade, the guy, without much effort, finished off all 3 monsters with one powerful blow, sending their dead souls to another world. With a smile, looking at how their bodies crumbled, the guy noticed that armored zombies were even weaker than some awakened D-rank ones, and therefore the battle turned out to be too easy. Turning his head, the guy noticed a whole group of living corpses, and then counted them and converted the number of zombies into points that he would receive for destroying them. Having dealt with the crowd of monsters without much difficulty, Adrian calmly moved on, thinking only that their armor could serve as good material. The guy was even more upset when he realized that there were no more monsters ahead, but only a dead end, which meant he would have to go back. However, the magician's insight helped Adrian well this time, because he noticed traces on the floor left by those who passed the test last time. Kneeling down on one knee, the guy studied them with interest and realized that the footprints looked quite strange. Taking a closer look, he noticed that right where the wall blocked his path, there was an incomplete footprint, from which only the heel was visible. Adrian thought that this wall must have moved somehow, since someone had passed here, and then smiled, realizing that this place had many secrets. For the first time in a long time, Adrian used his summoner's senses to feel all the details of the space around him. The guy looked around and saw details of a hidden mechanism in several torches on the wall. He realized that it was enough to light the first, third, and fifth torches for the mechanism to work. With one deft movement, the guy created a flame from the air, which flowed to the desired torches and lit them. Approaching the torches, the guy saw other parts of the mechanism and turned the second, fourth, and sixth of them. As soon as he finished his manipulations, the sound of gears and levers was heard in the walls, which influenced the mechanical door, opening it. Smiling at his own ingenuity, Adrian walked forward and found himself in a surprisingly brightly lit room, which stood out strongly from the dark atmosphere of the fortress. Right in front of Adrian in this hall, 3 unusual warriors in golden armor lined up. Walking closer without fear, Adrian examined his potential rivals with interest. After analyzing the spiritual power of these warriors, Adrian realized that these were rank C monsters, and anyone else in his place would have despaired by now. But Adrian, standing up and igniting his fist blade, prepared for battle, noting with a smile that for him this was just a light warm-up. Stretching out his free hand, the guy beckoned them with a gesture, urging them to attack and show everything they were capable of. Suddenly, for some reason, the monster's aura became much darker, and Adrian even became wary. And at this time, the weathered potion used by the thief-murderer had already risen to the floor above, and following his victim, he moved straight into the passage that Adrian himself had recently opened. Holding his stance, the guy prepared to meet the attack of one of the knights, who had already aimed the tip of his spear at Adrian, while the other 2 surrounded the enemy. Taking out his blade, the guy blocked 2 attacks with the blade, and dodged the third, without taking his eyes off his enemies, ready for battle. Carefully analyzing the battle, the guy ignited his fist blade and, choosing the right moment, rushed to the attack. With one powerful blow, Adrian broke through the defense of one of the warriors, sending the enemy flying, and then prepared for the next attack. However, his reaction was not enough for both warriors, and he found himself open to attacks from 2 spears at once. Having made one precise attack, the warriors were able to reach their target with their spears and pierce the guy's body, joyful at their own victory over the villain. However, it turned out that the warriors only penetrated a copy of Adrian, created by one of the skills that Lilia helped him acquire on the black market. Thanks to this skill, the guy was able to confuse the knights, which is why they both opened themselves up to attack again. Taking advantage of this, Adrian rushed forward and, igniting his fist blade, attacked one of the warriors, intending to finish him off as well, while the second tried to react. One powerful blow, and the second knight flew into the wall with his armor broken, leaving his comrade alone with the uninvited guest. Suddenly, Adrian noticed something that made him take his mind off the fight that was so enjoyable for the guy. The fallen knight, in whose armor there was a gaping hole from the guy's blow, suddenly burst into flames of gold, and Adrian wondered what kind of power had resurrected the Surf Knights. Thinking that the enemy was distracted, the remaining knight attacked again, intending to pierce the enemy's body right through, but Adrian again left the illusion in his place. In the blink of an eye, the guy found himself behind his opponent, intending to end this fight with one blow. Swinging and again igniting his fist blade, Adrian plunged it straight into the warrior's back, piercing right through his armor. Finally, Adrian relaxed, because all 3 knights were now defeated, although for some reason they were engulfed in harmless golden flames. It turned out that this flame was there for a reason, and one of the warriors suddenly stood up, staggering on both legs. Adrian noticed that he was not careful, and the knight serfs did not really die, and he himself could not even restore his health. Using his special vision, the guy saw an unusual magical seal that was located on the floor of the room. Having looked at it more closely, Adrian realized that this seal is a magical puppet formation, and it is for this reason that the knight does not die from his attacks. Adrian realized that those who last entered this room died, and were turned into puppets that could be resurrected to control their bodies. The guy realized that this room used to be something like a secret treasury, which required a similar special security system, although all the treasures had long been taken out. Suddenly, the eyes of the statue of an old man standing in the middle of the hall lit up, and she spoke in a booming voice, demanding that the guy get out. Opening his eyes in surprise, the guy even smiled from the realization that a soul was born in this statue, and it became the spirit of a magical formation, which is why it itself became a treasure. He realized that this figurine had been functioning for thousands of years, fueled by spiritual energy from an underground source, and therefore, its value was indescribable. Adrian thought that in his previous life, it took him a lot of effort to create an 8th-level spiritual power formation, but with this figurine, it would be much easier for him to achieve that power. Realizing that he simply could not leave without this figurine, the guy rushed into battle, ready to destroy all the knights just to get it. Coming closer, the guy realized that the statue had protected itself with a strong barrier of a light curtain, through which ordinary attacks could not be penetrated. Looking up, he saw that the figurine's eyes sparkled angrily brighter, and a loud voice suddenly sounded from it, calling on Adrian to die. Her power was so great that monsters suddenly appeared from everywhere, whose spiritual power clearly indicated that they were all puppets of this figurine. Looking up with interest, Adrian came to the conclusion that the figurine had decided to use all its powers, which meant he would have to take a risk. The guy used the thief skill to speed up his movement, and then the magician skill to hold the puppets around at least for a moment. Having given himself exactly a second to act, the guy rushed forward to the figurine and, thanks to the dispersion of magic, was able to break through its protection and burst inside. As soon as he penetrated the protection, his hand immediately grabbed the figurine, snatching it from the pedestal. Raising his hand with the statue, the guy loudly exclaimed that he had grabbed it when his skills stopped working and a whole horde of monsters rushed towards him, ready to tear him apart. Fortunately, Adrian calculated everything well enough, and therefore the blades, fangs, and claws froze just a couple of centimeters from his face and throat. Sighing, the guy sat cross-legged directly on the stone floor, intending to use the soul from this figurine and the energy of the hound pack collected earlier to create a high-level molding. Having poured this energy into the figurine, the guy activated its magical puppet formation, intending to absorb all the power that it had absorbed over these millennia. The guy's eyes shone when he began to use one of the techniques that he knew in a past life, and which allows a powerful soul to merge with the soul in the body of a man for successful molding. Adrian thought that the ranks were used specifically for separation, since ranks E to D were considered low, while ranks C and above became managers in the City of Dawn. Finally, the guy's body was enveloped in threads of golden energy, and he himself was able to create the formation of his spiritual energy, which is used to obtain rank C and higher. Sitting in the circle of the magical formation, Adrian began to modify the threads, thinking that the formation would be stronger the more patterns it contained. Looking down at his hands, Adrian noticed that they were covered with weak wounds, which meant that the power of the 1,000-year-old soul contained in the figurine was too strong for his body. Suddenly, Adrian saw that 2 spears were aiming at his head, and therefore he had to briefly interrupt the formation of patterns. Easily dodging, the guy realized that his soul had already completely merged with the soul of the figurine, and therefore the knights could now control their bodies themselves, although they would not be resurrected again. Although the guy was even happy, because the knights could help him strengthen his body, which began to collapse from the power contained inside. Diving under the knight's blow, the guy turned sharply and hit his opponent in the stomach, but the force contained in his body was so great that Adrian easily sent his opponent flying. Adrian fought furiously, taking attacks from a whole horde of monsters, each of which began to move in accordance with its own desire to kill him. Smiling slyly, the guy was even glad that there were so many monsters of no longer than D, but even several of C rank. And at the same moment, as he prepared to attack this entire army of monsters alone, Adrian felt an explosion of all his strength, which he had never expected.